Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's so amazing to see you all. And thank you for being on time this evening and joining us here at Helen's Daughters for yet another regional Ag-cademy. My name is Keithlyn Karua Freefer. I am the founder and executive director of Helen's Daughters. And it is my sincere gratitude to see, close to, 150, now it's counting, of women across the region who are genuinely interested in agriculture. It's going to be a 10-week journey, an adventure as we call it, and we are really so thrilled to open this year's program with you all. This really truly is a regional moment for us, not just for bringing women closer to the agricultural sector, but it just goes to show that women are indeed very, very much interested in agriculture. Just to give you sort of a background and so forth, we didn't want to just throw you in to the Ag-cademy. We wanted to give you a background on Helen's Daughters, some guidelines, some of the information that was shared, just to give you a bit of an introduction to the Ag-cademy, to us as an organization, to ensuring that you understand who your focal points are and what you can look forward to at the Ag-cademy. So Helen's Daughters is a nonprofit organization founded with a vision to empower women in agriculture to drive sustainable development. And what that means is that we're not just training you in agriculture, we're training you to become future leaders of your families, your communities, your region, and the globe, because Caribbean girls run it. Over the years, we've worked with thousands of women farmers, and the Ag-cademy has become one of our signature programs to build knowledge, skills, and confidence. I believe that this is coming on the 6th year that we have been running the Ag-cademy, but this is the 2nd year that we are running it regionally. So I hope you do take the chance to get to know women from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, women from St. Kitts and Nevis, and women from St. Lucia. This year's Ag-cademy, as maybe some of you have looked at the curriculum, covers a wide array of topics, from climate smart farming and agribusiness development to food safety, financial management, intellectual property, and beyond. Each session has been designed to be practical, to be informative, to be useful to today and to your business, and most importantly, to be empowering, so that essentially we're equipping you with the tools you need to grow, not just as farmers, but as leaders in your community. So before we begin, as I mentioned, I do want to give you an intro into Helen's Daughters so you understand who the organization is and a few important guidelines, particularly on attendance and punctuality, because that is connected to receiving a certificate from once you're done with the Ag-cademy. Participation rules, not just in the Ag-cademy, but also in the WhatsApp. Respect, because we are a community and we want to ensure that people are respectful of their environment and supportive of their fellow participants and facilitators, and even follow-ups and practicals. We believe this program will not only expand your knowledge, but also connect you with a network of peers who share your passion for agriculture. Together, you learn, you will grow, and you'll build stronger farming communities across the region. So with that, we will go into the intro of Helen's Daughters, but again, welcome, and officially we can begin the 2025 Ag-cademy. So if you just give me a moment, we will go into who is Helen's Daughters? What is this organization about? So as I've mentioned, our vision at Helen's Daughters is where we see women not just as farmers or women in agriculture, but as key drivers of sustainable development. Our mission is that we're trying to cultivate the soil of empowerment for you and nurture your growth through a number of areas, whether it's training like you are here today for our Ag-cademy, comprehensive support like you'll hear from things like our telecounseling program where you have access to free therapy, and other capacity building programs. So who we are. We're a registered nonprofit organization. Again, I think we've mentioned what we focus on, and we are also a fully independent organization. So we are not associated with any governments in any way. While we have partnered with different governments or government departments or on health fairs or one-off workshops and so forth, we receive no funding or subventions from any regional governments. However, we do have several funders and sponsors who require us to keep up the good work to continue to receive financial support. So Helen's Daughters, as some people would say, is a small but very mighty team. As I mentioned, I'm the founder and executive director, but as you can see, we have a number of persons that have been working tirelessly across the 3 countries to run the programs, the content, and the opportunities that you maybe have seen or heard of. We also report to a board. So we have a very small but agile board who keeps us on our toes and also keeps us accountable as well. In terms of our programming, many people may know of Helen's Daughters for the Ag-cademy or for our farmers markets, but we do so much more. So our Life Academy, for example, is actually free and open to women from the 3 countries that are represented here. And it's a monthly avenue to discuss topics that are not necessarily directly aligned to agriculture because we take a very holistic approach. So for example, you'll find Life Academies that focus on PCOS or reproductive health. You'll find Life Academy sessions on things like trauma-informed therapy. So we believe in that a good farmer is also a good, well-grown individual. So we use the Life Academy as a way to ensure that persons get the life skills that they're looking for. And again, many topics can go from financial literacy to public speaking and emergency preparedness. Our Ag-cademy. It is an agricultural training program that we've been running for the last 6 years now. Again, if you look at the curriculum, it approaches many key concepts in agriculture, but more so in agricultural entrepreneurship. So financial literacy, sustainable agriculture, nutritional marketing, and food safety are just some of the topics that you're going to be exposed to. Of course, it takes place virtually twice a week, and there's also in-person field trips, which I will introduce you to. Our co-creation and wellness retreats. That is a way for our members to essentially tell us how they've developed and give us ideas for future development. So we've birthed ideas like the farmers markets through co-creation retreats, even the telecounseling. So it's a chance for us to assess our members, to assess our programming, and also let us know how we can shape future activities. And of course, we're very big on community. So it's also an opportunity to meet your fellow farmers, to learn, share, and laugh, of course. Our ambassador program. So from last year, we rolled out our ambassador program, and we have some outstanding ladies represented through the 3 countries. So St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have the lovely Ronita Olivier and Natilla Pilgrim. We have from St. Lucia, we have those ladies pictured here. So we have Angelina Augustine, Diana Remy, and Malika Elibox. And in St. Kitts and Nevis, we have Beryl Seaton and Robertina Edwin. This program essentially selects outstanding farmers, and they were selected by their farmers. So it's done once a year. And essentially, these ambassadors undergo comprehensive training from public speaking, areas like, for example, grant making and so forth, leadership and advocacy trainings. And there's also opportunities for them to travel, whether regionally or globally, to be an ambassador for Helen's Daughters. Our farmers markets. If you haven't heard, we run farmers markets throughout all 3 countries. In St. Lucia, for example, a farmers market is held every 2nd and last Saturday of the month, but that varies. In St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Vincent, it is run more so monthly. In St. Kitts and Nevis, it's done in partnership with the Four Seasons Hotel in Nevis, and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our current presence is at Kaliqua Playing Field, I believe in Georgetown. And I have our in-country coordinator, Jaquana, on, so she can correct me. We're also excited because we're about to introduce a farmers market incubator for those ladies who have been active members and participants of the market as well. Our Unconference on Agriculture. So this was an innovative two-day event which we just held on the 23rd and 24th of August. The three C's which we focused on were connection, collaboration, and community. Three themes that are extremely important to us. We created a space where it wasn't just for women farmers, but for farmers, for civil society, for policymakers to really be able to essentially convene and to take a very non-traditional format. Aside from having our balcony chats, which covered many areas from conversations on cannabis to the future of Caribbean agriculture to going beyond handouts, we also had a mix of showcases. So like farm to table cooking shows and so forth. We had a petting zoo, which was run by one of our very own ladies. We had demos on home gardening, also done by our farmers. So it was really an amazing event. Over 300 persons came across the 2 days, and it's an event that we hope to run every 2 years. I won't go into the volunteering and so forth because that's usually an area that we go into for members, but just to say that Helen's Daughters is an organization where we don't accept membership fees, but what we take back is sweat equity. We always say what you put into the organization, you get back triple. And we monitor how you engage with your community, how you engage with your fellow farmers. And we're always looking out for those ladies that have just shown that they're always, willing and available, not just to help the organization, but most importantly, to help their fellow farmers. Because again, community is something that we're really, really big on. And of course, I think we have also found ways to incentivize our volunteering and so forth. In-country trainings. Now, this is going to be really interesting. We have in-country trainings, what we call field visits with our farmers all the time. So, for example, in St. Kitts and Nevis, I think they're going to be doing a trip soon to the vanilla farm. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there was just what we call a program we call a sister circle, which is more focused on mental health and wellness. And that was another St. Vincent Botanical Gardens, where there was a therapist who was a facilitator and so forth. In St. Lucia, ours is coming on board. I think it's yoga themed. So again, we take a very holistic approach. But aside from those in-country trainings that are focused on wellness and so forth, we also do a lot on agricultural training. You will be exposed to these. So there will be one field visit per month during the Ag-cademy. This will be arranged by our in-country coordinators. So our in-country coordinators, we have Mrs. Latoya Matthew Duncan in St. Kitts and Nevis, who you'll be meeting, I'm sure, in the next few days and weeks. In St. Lucia, we have Miss Kiana Charles. And we've been blessed to also have our moderator on, Miss Shakwana Baba from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So you'll get to know her, and and those three are your coordinators who will be covering your field trips, and you'll be getting to know where you're going and so forth. And this is an authoring, which is part of the Ag-cademy. And finally, you can find us on social media. Everything is at Helen's Daughters. We really hope that you like our pages, you follow us. I would definitely say please subscribe to the Helen's Daughters YouTube pages because we usually update our pages once a week, especially when we have Ag-cademy with past sessions. If you're really interested in particular sessions, you can have a look at some of the previous Ag-cademies. And of course, our website as well is a huge resource. There's also links there to previous Ag-cademies. There's also a handbook on sustainable agriculture, some research that we've done as well. So please, please, please take advantage of it. So I'm going to stop here, and then I am going to quickly go into the curriculum and just some of the guidelines and so forth. So just give me a quick second. All right. So our guidelines, like any community, there's always going to be rules, there's always going to be guidelines. I've mentioned who we are, and I've talked a bit about the Ag-cademy, mentioning that you have access to virtual coursework and practical experience. And of course, the program is completely free. So in terms of access to the virtual class, it is a 10-week course, which takes place on Zoom for the virtual classes. The link to the Zoom class, of course, has been sent via email and also via our WhatsApp group. Of course, we use tools like Zoom to track attendance, which means that we need your name to show up for sure in the Zoom. Because guys, look at it. We have about 206 participants right now. Our academies are usually in demand. It's really difficult for us to track in, oh, Sharon came in at 6:23. So if you don't have your name. So please, we urge you to ensure that you don't use aliases, you ensure that you use your name. So when you've registered for the webinar, we please ask you to use your full name, because that's how we're able to track attendance. As I mentioned, all the videos and class materials will be recorded and posted on the HG YouTube channel for later viewing at the end of the course. The program will run every Tuesday and Thursday, as we've mentioned, from 6 to 8 p.m. We ask that you be on time, please, because it's not just respect for your fellow farmers, but it's also respect for our facilitators. We know that life happens. You can always shoot us, the in-country coordinators, you can always shoot us a message and so forth. But again, just showing up with your name, at least within the first 15 minutes, will make it so much easier to know who is there. Each class consists of a sort of live lecture and then a question and answer segment. We want things to be dynamic. We want you to ask questions, but we also want you to give the chance for the facilitators to have a chance to get through their thoughts. And when they're done, they'll either open the floor. Each facilitator is very different. There's some facilitators who might open the floor every 30 minutes. There's some facilitators who might do their presentation in an hour and a half and leave like 30 minutes for Q&A. We ask that you respect their different styles, they're different individuals, but I promise that we try to choose really well. Most of these facilitators we've worked with for several years, and I have to say that they are amazing, but we just ask for mutual respect and understanding. Also, with the Q&A, we would ask, rather than just unmuting and asking, please use the raise hand icon on Zoom. If you're unsure, we're happy to share some, we will be sharing some video content about the raise hand icon, about having the right name in the Zoom webinar. Classroom conduct. So by registering to this program, you're agreeing to maintain a respectful and courteous demeanor and to your fellow course participants, and of course the facilitators as well. Guys, this is really a safe space, and we're really big on ensuring that people feel comfortable within these spaces. So any disrespectful behavior, discourteous or profane, will be subject to immediate removal from the course. And finally, in terms of graduation requirements, while this course is free, we also require some accountability from you. So to successfully graduate from this course, participants must attend at least 80% of all classes. Attendance will be recorded at each session, and participants are required to join sessions only through the official link provided after registration. We've also using any other link will not count towards attendance. So please keep that in mind. Both the pre-survey and post-surveys that we've sent must be completed. These are part of your requirements. Of course, as we mentioned, we are a fully independent organization, and one of the ways that we are able to track our own impact and keep this program free is by ensuring that we actually have, like pre and post surveys and data. so that we can essentially show the impact of this program. So we ask that you can just stick to that and ensure that you complete the pre and post survey. And of course, a graduation ceremony will be held at the end of the course to recognize all successful participants. There might also be some little surprises during the course of the Ag-cademy, and our eyes are always out for persons that are really interactive and really that honestly constantly show up as well. So I want to thank you for this. I will just say though that there are just like a few more areas that I want to mention, particularly with the WhatsApp guidelines. I know it's another WhatsApp group. For some people, it can be irritating. For some people, it can be lovely. But we ask you to please keep this space a little more streamlined, a little more supportive and productive for everyone. So the purpose of the chats, please be mindful of the messages that you send. So for example, you don't have to say good morning every day. You don't have to, please don't send in random messages. This needs to be focused particularly on the Ag-cademy. So please be mindful of when you send messages. Ideally, just before or shortly after the sessions would be great. The message volume. We want the chat to be something that is very strategic so people can go through it and get the information that they need. So for example, like the welcome package or the curriculum guide. So when you send many messages, it kind of clutters everything and it floods the really important content. And then of course, respect for all members. As I mentioned, just like in this virtual space, also in the WhatsApp, we ask you to please respect our coordinators and one another. So again, any inappropriate or disrespectful messages or any kind of lewd behavior within the WhatsApp chat are grounds for you to be removed from the group and from the course. So again, together, let's try to keep this space as supportive and respectful to everyone. For any questions, requests, and comments or anything, you can always email us at info@helensdaughters.org or of course, send a message to our Ag-cademy WhatsApp group. Now, these documents have been sent to you via email and I know for sure via WhatsApp. I have taken up quite a bit of time and I know that there are some questions. I will take a few questions because I don't want our amazing facilitator to have to wait. But I will say in the chat, ladies, for those who are asking whether your name shows up, your name is definitely showing up. So thanks for asking that. And I will take these questions. So Jarana Joseph, you can go ahead. Jarana, if you unmute, you're able to ask your question. Or is it Jarina Joseph?
Joanna, you're correct. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Good evening again. Good evening to all. For someone like me who don't have any WhatsApp, how would I be able to keep up?
So great question, Jarina. You are also, I'm hoping that you have been able to access everything through email. So we will also send.
I have.
Okay, so we'll also send emails. We
Great.
try to use both methods, but that's such a great question. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you as well.
No problem. I see that Otto. You can go ahead, Otto.
Good night, everyone. Just to add to that, Jarina, so the link that you would have received from Zoom, to join this session, that's the very same link that you would need to continue using, for the other session, for the remaining sessions. And yes, the information will be sent via via email if there are any major changes to be had.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Otto. So ladies, I have talked a lot. And I think it's now for the fun to begin. And honestly, as usual, this is one of my favorite persons and human beings in the entire world. And he's also a Caribbean rock star. So we really are very um, honored to have him within our presence. And our first facilitator for the Ag-cademy is Dr. James Fletcher. Jimmy, as I call him, and hopefully I think by the time you're done, he'll probably have everybody calling him Jimmy as well, is the CARICOM climate envoy and a St. Lucian thought leader in public policy, climate justice, and energy reform. He was named a REN 21 renewable energy champion for Latin America and the Caribbean this year. He was elected as an expert / non-state actor member of the Global Green Growth Institute Council in 2024 and served as chair of the executive board of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. From 2011 to 2016, as St. Lucia's Minister for the Public Service, Information, Broadcasting, Sustainable Development, Energy, Science, and Technology. He led the modernization of the energy sector, opening the electricity sector to competition from renewable energy and establishing a multi-sector regulator while also expanding digital inclusion through community ICT centers, the initiation of an island-wide public Wi-Fi, a 311 service, and an employee assistance program. Dr. Fletcher co-founded the region's, which is amazing, 1.5 to Stay Alive. I'm sure many of you have heard of this civil society campaign. And as CARICOM's ministerial lead at COP21, he co-chaired the negotiations that shaped the Paris Agreement's ambitions and the 1.5 degrees Celsius long-term temperature goal. His contributions are highlighted in Profiles of Paris. He is the founder and managing director of Solaricon Limited, advising on sustainable development, renewable energy, water and climate policy and governance. He also launched the Caribbean Climate Justice Project in 2020 and Youth IRI, Innovators for Renewable and Inclusive Energy in 2024, to empower civil society in the energy transition and climate justice. His publications include Governing in a Small Caribbean Island State, The Battle for Small Island Developing States in the Cambridge University Press publication, Negotiating the Paris Agreement, The Insider Stories, Where is the Justice? An anthology of Caribbean youth perspectives on the climate crisis, the Regional Strategic Action Plan for Achieving Resilience in the Water Sector, and Climate Tipping Point, a 12-part graphic novel series. His contributions are internationally recognized, particularly in 2019 when the UK's Chevening Scholarship Program named him one of our 35 global change makers. Ladies, as I said, we're graced by the presence of a rock star, but most importantly, he is probably one of the most humble persons that you will meet with such a bio. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. James Fletcher and welcome ladies to your intro to climate change. Thanks again, everyone, and best of luck with the program.
Thank you for that awesome introduction, Keithlyn. Wow. Thank you. And it's great once again to be here with Helen's Daughters, with your Ag-cademy. I can't even remember how many of these I've done already, but it really is good to be here with you and to, speak to another cohort of Ag-cademy. Someone is saying that they're unable to hear. Are you hearing me, Keithlyn?
Yes, I can.
Okay, because I just saw in the chat that someone said that they were unable to hear. Okay, great. So yeah, it's really good to be here with you and to be speaking again on a subject that, as you know, is very dear to my heart. Somebody else said that they're not hearing me. Donette Constance, we are not hearing you. Don't know what's going on.
I'm hearing you. Shakwana, are you able to hear Dr. Fletcher?
Confirming that I can. Thank you.
Yes. So ladies, I would say to please check the volumes on your devices, because I can hear very clearly. And I'm
Yeah.
seeing that persons are saying they can hear loud and clear. So please check your device.
Yeah, and the output volume on my microphone is as high as it can. Let me see if I can increase it. Maybe that might help. Okay, this should be better. All right, so yeah, much better. Okay, great. So yeah, so today I'm going to speak on the impacts of climate change on agriculture and food security. So let's go straight into that presentation. And can you confirm, Keithan, that you're seeing my slide?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the impact of climate change on agriculture and food security. So this, every so often, every 5 or so years, there's this group of scientists called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they produce these scientific documents that tell us actually what's going on with the climate, how is climate change impacting various parts of our environment, what impact it's having on small island developing states, which is what we call countries like ours that are small states that are developing, that are low-lying, that are surrounded by water. So they put out these reports every so often that kind of gives you a state of play, an assessment of what is happening with climate change around the world and how climate change is affecting our systems. And the last report they put out stated, and this is taken straight from it, it says that human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. So think about that. Our climate is warming at a rate that we have not seen in the last 2,000 years. We're not talking about 20 years, 200 years, and even 200 years would have been, kind of difficult for us to wrap our minds around because that's going back into the period of our great grandparents. We're talking about the last 2,000 years. And that's because of something that is called a greenhouse effect. Now, you're farmers, so I know I don't have to explain to you how a greenhouse operates, but what I can explain to you is how you compare how a greenhouse operates to what's happening to our planet. So what we speak about is that there's a natural greenhouse effect. So all of you know that if you stand in a greenhouse, let's say at 11 o'clock during the day, that greenhouse is much warmer, and it doesn't matter whether the greenhouse covering is glass or it's plastic. That greenhouse is much warmer than it is outside. And why is that? Because the greenhouse is trapping all of the heat that is within the greenhouse. It's not allowing that heat to escape. Now, if you have venting at the bottom or your doors are open, it might be a little cooler. But if you have a greenhouse that is completely covered, front and back, doors are closed, no mesh, you can imagine how hot that greenhouse gets. Well, that's the same thing that's happening to our planet, but happening naturally. So what happens with our planet, with all of the people who are on the planet, the animals and everything, the vehicles that are driving past, the planes, everything, there's a lot of heat that's being created. We are generating heat, ourselves, the animals, and everything else. What normally happens and what is supposed to happen is that heat escapes out into the atmosphere. I don't know, you've probably heard that hot air rises. So hot air it naturally rises. It does not stay at the bottom. It rises and it goes away. However, what has been happening is that we've been producing something that we call greenhouse gases. And there are three primary greenhouse gases that we have been producing. Carbon dioxide that you get when you burn gasoline or diesel or kerosene to produce energy. You also get carbon dioxide just by our own natural respiration, our own natural metabolism. Just by living, human beings generate and expel more carbon dioxide than they put in, which is something that you've learned. But there's also another greenhouse gas called methane, or methane, depending on how you pronounce it, methane. Methane is a gas that is produced from various sources. First of all, from landfill. So if you have a landfill, like you have a landfill in Deglo, that landfill, as things start rotting, those rotting organic compounds, it could be waste, vegetable waste that you have there, or animal matter, or whatever you have there that is rotting, that is decaying, it produces methane gas. The other things that produce methane gas are livestock. So cows, when cows, as part of their normal, again, activities, when cows expel air, the air that they expel is methane gas. So those are the two primary sources of methane gas. You also get methane gas when you are generating natural gas. So when they creating natural gas, let's say in Trinidad, in all these offshore places where they're creating natural gas, then you get methane being produced. And the final greenhouse gas is a gas that we call nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide or nitric oxide is a gas that is produced from the use of fertilizers. It's also produced when power plants, electricity power plants are operating. So what has been happening is that as we've been generating more and more products, with what we've called industrialization, from the 1970s, our the Earth has become a lot more industrialized. So we've been producing a lot more products, a lot more cars, a lot more, in the last 20 years in particular, a lot more cell phones, a lot more clothes. The population is growing, but our need for product has also grown, particularly in the Western world, where we feel that we must have the latest and the greatest and the best. So as these things are being produced, energy is being used to produce them, and that is generating more carbon dioxide. Also, as we have more people on the planet, as more and more people, because the number of people on our planet has been increasing, it hasn't stayed stagnant. So as more and more people are being born, then you also have more carbon dioxide being created. Methane gas, as we've gone more intensive into livestock production, particularly in the countries that are big livestock producers, countries in South America, countries like Brazil and Argentina, countries like New Zealand that are big cattle producers. The more cattle that they produce, the more methane gas that is produced, and the more greenhouse gas that's being produced. Also, as a result of consuming and buying all of these things and also consuming more food, we are also creating more landfills. So there's a lot more material that is decaying. So a lot more gas is escaping from landfills because we have a lot more landfills now, not just in the Caribbean, but all around the world. There's a lot more waste. We are generating a lot more waste. So whether we're disposing of that waste by burning it in an incinerator or by allowing it to decay, if it is waste that can decay naturally, that is creating methane gas. And the final gas, nitrous oxide, as we're using more fertilizers, we are also generating more nitrous oxide. So what is happening is that these three gases are forming like a blanket, a cover around our planet, around Earth. And as that blanket gets thicker and thicker, because we're producing more gases, then our planet gets warmer and warmer. Think of it like, remember in December and January, depending on where you're living, particularly if you're living somewhere in the mountains where it's quite cold. If you're living in forest there, it'll be a lot colder than where I'm living here in Grozely. You might want to sleep with a blanket because you figure, boy, it's kind of cold in December and January. If you sleep under a bed sheet, it's not as warm as if you sleep under a blanket or under a thicker blanket. So the thicker the blanket, the thicker the covering that you're sleeping under, the warmer that you feel. That's just natural. That's common sense. Well, it's the same thing with our planet. The thicker that layer of greenhouse gas gets, because we are producing more and more of it, the more it is sending heat back onto our planet. So it's like, again, your greenhouse, you're putting more and more layers of glass or more and more layers of plastic. More heat is being trapped in your greenhouse, so your greenhouse is getting warmer. And that's the same thing that is happening to our planet. We are generating more greenhouse gases, so that is causing our planet to get warmer and warmer. And the consequence of that is that the last 10 years are the hottest ever. So from 2015 to 2025, every year we are either breaking a record or coming close to breaking a record. So I remember when, and I've been doing these presentations for a while now, and I remember 2016. 2016 was the hottest year ever, 9 years ago. When 2016 came, we said, oh my gosh, 2016 just broke all of the records that we'd seen before. And we figured, you know what? It'll probably be a while before we see another year like 2016. Well, guess what? 2016 was that record was completely broken in 2020. So this 2016 is somewhere around, if you go back, so this is the graph, the furthermost right on that graph is 2024. So that's 2023, 2022, 2021. So 2016 is kind of somewhere where you see that straight line, just where that straight line, the first point above that straight line, I think, is 2015, and then the next one is 2016. So you see how high 2016 was there. It's like a skyscraper that is above all of the other skyscrapers. Until 2024 came around, 2023 came around and made 2016 look like nonsense. You know, like we say, like magie. It just blew 2016 out of the water. And we said, wow, 2023, they said it was because there was a El Nino, and El Nino was making the planet hotter. So it was not just climate change, but it was El Nino. Well, 2024 came around a year later, and you could see 2024, which is the last line there on that graph. 2024 completely wiped out the record of 2023. So depressingly, what is happening? Every year we either breaking a record or coming close to setting a record. And that is what has been happening with our planet. But even more scarily, 2024 was the first year that we went past 1.5 degrees Celsius in warming. Now, why is that important? Well, you heard Keithlin say that one of the things that we fought for, small island developing states, St. Lucia, the Caribbean, and others, one of the things we fought for in the Paris Agreement when we were negotiating it in 2015 in Paris was a line in the agreement that said that we should not have global warming that exceeds 1.5 degrees Celsius. So anything higher than 1.5 degrees Celsius was dangerous, particularly for small island states like ours. And we had to do everything within our power to keep that global warming to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, unfortunately, we exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius last year. Now, that does not mean everything is lost, because it is possible for us to go back below 1.5 if we can reduce on the amount of greenhouse gases that we're producing. But that will require some very hard work and some very tough decisions to be taken, and we haven't seen that happen yet. But what I want to leave you with is that we exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius, which we set as really the maximum temperature that would be safe for small island developing states like ours. So one of the things about climate change is that it is what we call a force multiplier. It takes something and it makes it worse. So where there is poverty, climate change worsens poverty. Where you do not have resilience, where you're vulnerable, where a country or community is vulnerable, climate change worsens that vulnerability. It increases the risk that you're exposed to. And the other thing climate change does is that it threatens our national development. And you'll see that in some of the slides I'll show a little bit later. It really makes it difficult for a country, particularly a small island developing state, to develop at the rate that it would like to, because every time something happens, it affects it and it starts all over again. Those of you who understand Creole, so our St. Lucian farmers, it's what we call in Creole, laver la main, souiller à terre. Every time you wash your hand, it's the equivalent of washing your hand and then drying your hand on the ground, on the same dirty ground that probably caused your hand to be dirty in the first place. So if you're a farmer, you've been playing in soil, working in soil, potting your plants, taking out weeds and stuff, and your hands are dirty, and you've decided, okay, I've finished for the day, let me wash my hands. So you take your time and you soap your hands down and you wash them, you scrub out as much of the soil as you can get from underneath your fingernails, and then you decide that you're going to dry your hands in the same soil that you're working in. Laver la main, souiller à terre. That's what climate change does. Every time you think that you are making progress, climate change comes and says, hold on, not yet. And this shows you what has been happening to the temperatures around the world from 1890, when we started recording these temperatures, to the present day. So the more yellow and the more red it gets, so red is hottest, yellow is getting warm, red is hottest. You can see what has been happening, and look at, like, around now, 1980s, look at what is happening across the world, not just the Caribbean, South America, North America, but we're talking about Europe, Africa. But if you look at this, the other thing you'll notice is that the extremes, the North Pole and the South Pole, where we have our ice caps, where we have the glaciers that you hear so much about, those are the areas that are getting hot faster. And what does that mean? It means now that these glaciers, these ice caps are melting much more quickly than the rest of the planet because it is warming up much faster in the North Pole and the South Pole than it is warming up across the Caribbean and in North America, Central Europe, etc. Now think about this. Think about the kind of heat you've been experiencing for the last 2 to 3 years. And as bad and as intolerable as you think that heat is, and consider that where we have those ice caps, where we have those glaciers, where we have that snow, that heat is even worse. So you can begin to see what impact that is having on our planet. And when I spoke about 1.5 degrees, you could see this is like a thermometer that shows you where we are. So although we passed 1.5 degrees Celsius last year, the kind of warming we've seen up until 2023, 2024 was 1.4 degrees Celsius. Now, in the Paris Agreement that we negotiated and all the countries around the world agreed in 2015 that they would sign on to this Paris Agreement and they would do what is necessary to keep temperatures below 1.5 and a whole bunch of other things. We also agreed that we would reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases. So we would reduce how much we're depending on gasoline and diesel to generate electricity. And we generate more electricity from wind and from solar and geothermal and water. So we do all of these things. We've not been doing that. So right now, if we were to do everything, the most optimistic scenario, the best case scenario, if everybody did what they could, we would probably still not get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We'd probably get to around 1.9 degrees Celsius. That's what this first thing is showing you, optimistic scenario. If we go on the basis of what people have written and pledged and said that they will do, then the best we'll get to is 2.1 degrees Celsius. If we go on the basis of the targets that they've set, these countries have set for what they expect to happen by 2030, the best we'll get to is 2.6 degrees Celsius. If we go on what they're doing, not what they say they will do, but what they are doing. So forget about, yes, I promise I will do this, I promise I will do that. Not what I promised to do, but what I am doing and what I've shown you that for the last 5 years I have been doing. We probably will get somewhere between 2.7 degrees Celsius and 3.4 degrees Celsius. And that will be very, very dangerous for small island developing states like ours, but also for countries that are low-lying. So even cities in the United States like Louisiana, New Orleans, and Miami, those cities will find themselves under serious pressure because sea levels will start to rise. Places in Europe like Vienna and others that are very low-lying, as these ocean waters rise, then they will find themselves in trouble. But if you think that we in the Caribbean will find ourselves in trouble, it's going to be even worse in some of our Pacific islands. So countries like the Marshall Islands, like Tuvalu, like Vanuatu, like Kiribati, those islands are just really, how do I describe them? What we call atolls. It's basically like a large expanse of sand. There's very little mountain, if any. The highest point is like 3 feet above sea. There's no mountain. It's just a flat surface. You stay on one side and you can see the other end of the island. I'm not even talking about flat like Barbados. Barbados has some hills. I'm talking about completely flat. Nothing, no hills, nothing. Any amount of sea level rise will completely wash away those islands, will completely sink those islands. So these countries are already making plans about what they will do if these temperatures continue increasing at that level. And some of the governments of these countries are looking to see where they can buy land in other parts of the world so that they can relocate their entire population. Imagine that. Imagine you living in St. Lucia and you hearing that there's a very strong likelihood that within the next 50 to 60 years, where you're living will be completely underwater. What do you do? I mean, unless the government decides that it is going to buy land for you in another island in Dominica or in Guyana, and it's going to move you to Guyana. Basically, what you're hearing is that maybe you would be dead by then, but your children and your grandchildren will not have any land for them to live on. That is what is facing some of the people who live in some of these countries. So land and sea surface temperatures are hotter than ever before. And I don't have to tell you about the land because you farm the land, you live on the land, you walk on the land, you know how hot it is. Every year has been hotter and hotter and hotter. But the seas are also warmer. Our seas are also warmer. Now, thank God we haven't had any hurricanes yet, but one of the, and let's hope we have none for this year, but one of the things that happen when you have hot oceans, hot sea temperatures, warm sea temperatures, is that there's a lot of energy in the ocean for the hurricanes to feed off. So once a hurricane passes over the ocean, there's a lot of energy that it can take up, and it can now become stronger and much more quickly. So the reality is the last time our planet was this warm was between 2.6 and 3 million years ago, during a period that we call the mid-Pliocene period. That's how far back you have to go to get an equivalent for how hot it is right now. But the scary thing is that although the atmospheric levels of that greenhouse gas I told you about, carbon dioxide, were comparable, were very similar to what we have now, sea levels will 10 to 25 meters higher. So that's between 30 and 70 feet higher than they are now, which is why we believe, many of us who are working in this area believe, that what they've been telling us will be the impact of the rising sea levels is underestimated. You know, when they tell you that there'll be a 1 or 2 meter increase in sea levels above current levels by the end of the 21st century, we believe that they're underestimating it, because our planet is a living system, and you can never tell accurately by sitting in front of a computer how a living system will operate. Think of your body, and you have a fever. If you do not take steps to bring that fever down, either taking an antibiotic if that fever is caused by some bacterial infection, or taking cold showers so that you can reduce the temperature, as you do with children, to reduce the temperature so that their bodies don't start overheating. If you do not do that and you allow that fever to continue for too long, it now starts affecting the organs of your body. So your liver is affected, your kidney is affected, your heart will be affected, your lungs will be affected if you run that fever for too long. Well, that's what's happening to us, to our planet. Our planet has been running a fever for an extended period. And if we do not do something about it, we have no idea what the impact of that will be on everything, not just on human beings, on the ice caps, on our rivers, on water, but on every single thing. The animals that we share this planet with, everything will be impacted. So for all Caribbean countries, climate change will have devastating consequences. And this is St. Lucia. And yes, while we have mountains in the back, think of what will happen if you have a 1 meter, a 3 foot or 5 feet, 6 feet increase in sea levels. What will happen to all of the people who live near the coast? Because in all of our countries, we have a lot of people who live near the coast. It was convenient to live near the coast, because before we had planes, we had boats. So we moved around by boats, and also our coastal areas are the flatter parts of our country. The interior is the hilly, the mountainous part. The coast is flatter, so that's where it was easier for us to build our homes. That's where it was easier for us to build our churches and our schools, and for us to build our roads. So if you have sea level rise, those things will be the first to go. Our roads, our churches, our schools, our homes, these are all located along the coast, and that's not just St. Lucia. That is every single Caribbean island. A 1 meter sea level rise, which is the lowest that we think that we will get. So that's best case scenario. What the scientists are predicting is that you'll have approximately 1,300 square kilometers of land area being lost across the Caribbean. So that's the equivalent of Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Anguilla disappearing. Now, I'm not saying that these countries will disappear. What I'm saying is that we will lose an amount of land across the Caribbean that will be equal to the combined areas of these 4 islands. If we're also looking at over 110,000 people displaced. So over 110,000 people having to find somewhere else to live, because you now have water that has encroached. So where they lived before is no longer livable. You'll have 149 tourism resorts being damaged. Why? Because we like to build tourism resorts on the beach, because we figure every tourist that comes to the Caribbean wants to walk out of their room and curl their toes in the sand. Well, the thing with these tourism resorts is, as beautiful and as attractive as they are, they're also very vulnerable. they're also very exposed. They're also at risk. So as you have sea level rise, and even you don't even need sea level rise. Whenever you have strong hurricanes that come through and you have storm surges, you see that our hotels are always the hardest hit because they're right there on the beach. You have loss or damage of 5 power plants, 5 electricity plants. Very importantly for you, 1% of agricultural land being lost completely. Loss or damage of 21 CARICOM airports, because most of our airports are located very close to the ocean. Look at UNORA in St. Lucia and look at George F.L. Charles in St. Lucia. It does not take much for those airports to be underwater from sea level rise. And the land surrounding 35 seaports will be completely flooded, and 567 kilometers of road will be lost. That's a 1 meter sea level rise. A 2 meter sea level rise, as you'd expect, is even worse. Over 3,000 square kilometers of land area being lost. That's the equivalent of Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Grenada. You know, Martinique and Guadeloupe are quite big islands. So that's Martinique and Guadeloupe plus Grenada disappearing. That's the equivalent of that. Over 260,000 people displaced. So that's like the entire population of Barbados being displaced. That's what we will have across the Caribbean. Over 233 tourism resorts damaged. Loss or damage of 9 power plants. Greater than 3% of agricultural land being lost. Loss or damage of 31 CARICOM airports. That's an airport in every single, well, it's actually more than that. It's more than an airport in every single island. And in some islands where you have more than one airport, they will be lost or damaged. And land surrounding 35 ports completely flooded, 710 kilometers of roads being lost, and 40% of sea turtle nesting beaches being completely flooded. So our sea turtles will have nowhere to come and nest. Mangroves are also being affected because our mangroves are retreating from a combination of sea level rise, but also the pollution on the land. And you know that mangroves play very important roles. Mangroves are an important buffer. They really are a very important sea break. So, you know, they stop the waves from coming onshore and causing erosion. They also provide habitats, places for fish to breed, very safe places for fish to breed. And very importantly, what our mangroves do is that they work as filters. They work as basically they work as filters so that they prevent the silt that is on the land. Let's say you have heavy rainfall and soil is being washed out. The mangrove catches that silt, it catches that soil and prevents it from going into the ocean, where it would then cause problems with damaging coral reefs and making it difficult for some fish to survive. So, but our mangroves are under stress because of a combination of sea level rise and land-based pollution. We have seen, again, from this was a report that was done in 2020, the replacement cost for tourism resorts. So remember that earlier slide I showed you with how many tourism resorts will be damaged? To replace those resorts, to repair them, will cost over $1.6 billion US across the Caribbean. That's a lot of money. As I said earlier, one of the consequences of climate change and of warmer oceans is stronger hurricanes, because those hurricanes have more energy in the oceans to feed off. And this table shows you the impact of some hurricanes on islands in the Caribbean. So when Hurricane Allen hit St. Lucia, it caused damage that was equivalent to 66% of St. Lucia's GDP. That means 2/3 of the GDP, of the gross domestic product, of everything, the value of everything the country produced for that year was destroyed by Hurricane Allen. That the amount of damage Hurricane Allen caused was equivalent to 2/3 of the total value of production of St. Lucia for 1980. So let's go back to more recent times. Let's look at Dominica in 2015. Tropical Storm Erica. Tropical Storm Erica caused damage that was equivalent to 90% of Dominica's GDP. So the amount of damage, the amount of loss and damage that Dominica experienced, the value of it was equivalent to almost the entire production value of the productive capacity of the country for that year. 2 years later, Dominica was hit again by Hurricane Maria. You know, I like my Creole phrases. So that one is well, that's what happened to Dominica in 2017. They were just starting to recover from 2015 when 2017 Hurricane Maria passed through and caused damage that was equivalent to 226% of that country's GDP. So that's the equivalent of 2 years worth of productive capacity of Dominica being destroyed in 1 space of 24 hours. That hurricane passed over that country, spent less than 24 hours over that country, and left the country completely destroyed. I worked in Dominica for 6 months after Hurricane Maria, and I can tell you the country, when I set foot in Dominica after that hurricane, I could not believe my eyes, because Dominica is one of those islands that I visited quite often before the hurricane, and I could not believe what I saw. There was not one coconut tree standing that had any branches on it. It was just complete devastation everywhere. Coconut trees were like toothpicks just standing, pointing out into the air. It was really devastating. And Hurricane Irma did the same thing to the BVI, except even worse. It caused damage equivalent to 300% of the country's GDP. Last year, we had Hurricane Beryl, broke endless records. Earliest Category 4 and Category 5 hurricane ever recorded. The hurricane that formed the furthest east in the Atlantic since 1933. Strongest sustained winds prior to August. And Hurricane Beryl, although when it went past St. Vincent the Grenadines and Grenada, it was not yet a Category 5. It was a Category 4 hurricane. It caused significant damage in those two islands. The year before, Hurricane Otis. Hurricane Otis was just off the shore of Mexico as a tropical storm. So the residents of Acapulco in Mexico were preparing for a tropical storm. In 12 hours, that hurricane went from being a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane. So can you imagine? You told by the Met Office that this will be a tropical storm. Yes, you still have to be on your guard, because remember what Tropical Storm Debbie did to us. But at least the winds will not be heavy. It may be carrying a lot of rain, but you should come through it relatively unharmed. Well, by the time it hit land, it comes at a Category 5. You can't prepare for that, because you were preparing for a tropical storm that, because the oceans were so warm and the conditions were so favorable, in 12 hours, it went from a tropical storm to Category 5. That's the kind of thing that normally happens over the space of 2 or 3 days. That happened in 12 hours. And what these hurricanes do, well, we know it, we've seen it, we've lived through it. Damage to the national electricity grid, damage to our national water infrastructure. That's actually a picture of the Roseau Dam. Any of you who have been to the Roseau Dam will know that there's actually an island in the Roseau Dam. If you take a boat and you go up the reservoir, up the dam, you come to a point where there is just solid land. You could actually get off the boat and start walking inland. That's that white area you're seeing there. And that's the result of Thomas and the trough that deposited all of that soil in that dam, to the point where the capacity of the dam is a lot less than it should be. And that's why, for a long time, you've heard, back to the time when I was minister, we were talking about dredging the dam. That's why you have to dredge the dam, because the capacity of the dam, the ability of the dam to hold water, has been so compromised that the dam is holding less than half of the water that it really should be holding. And a dam that was created so that during the dry season, residents in the north would have a constant supply of water. That's not happening, because where we should have water, we have silt, we have sand, we have trees, we have logs, we have everything. This is what Roseau Dominica looked like the day after the passage of Hurricane Maria. Can you imagine waking up to this one morning, that your hurricane passes, you hearing all this noise and the winds and everything, and then the next morning you wake up and you go into your town, you go into your city, and this is what you see. How do you deal with that? Just psychologically, how do you deal with that? How do you even think about how you recover from this, how you clean up? And that's what Dominica had to go through. That's what the BVI had to go through. That's what Bahamas had to go through with Dorian. Thank God we've not had to go through that for a while. But let me tell you, every single one of our countries is vulnerable. And they say, therefore, there but for the grace of God go I. That's what we have to say every year, and cross our fingers and hope that this does not happen to us, because really it can happen anytime. When they tell you that this is not going to be a very active hurricane season, there'll only be 2 or 3 hurricanes, that does not matter at all. All it takes is one hurricane, one Category 5 hurricane passing over an island, and you go and talk to the residents of that island and tell them that it was not an active year, that we only had 2 or 3 hurricanes. All it takes is that one hurricane to cause damage, and it doesn't matter. Sometimes you could have 25 hurricanes going through, and none of them makes landfall. So yes, it was an active hurricane season, but it was not a devastating or damaging hurricane season. All it takes is one of these Cat 5s to hit land, and there's nothing you could do to prepare for 150, 175 mile an hour winds going through your home. The other thing we've been seeing as a result of climate change is more heat waves. We all see what the heat is like now. I mean, we're in September, and this heat is unbearable. But we had seen it at the beginning of the year. By January, February, March, we're already seeing temperatures. If you recall, just go back to the beginning of this year. By February, March, we were already seeing temperatures and heat that we expect to see in July and August. So there's no surprise that August and September have been so hot. And what that means, particularly for people like yourselves that spend so much of your time outdoors working, is that you are very vulnerable to heat exhaustion, to dehydration, to heat stroke from prolonged exposure to high temperatures. So if you're a farmer or if you're a fisher and you're out in the hot sun with no covering, no shade for extended periods of time, you are extremely vulnerable. The other thing we're seeing is forest and bushfires increasing because it's hot, it's dry, so the conditions are perfect for forests and bushfires. We're seeing more frequent droughts. So this year we were good. St. Lucia was very lucky this year. We really did not have a drought this year. We had constant rainfall throughout the dry season. Yeah, there was some dry periods, but not as bad as it has been in previous years. But if you think back to the year before, 2024 and 2023, and most of the years before that, we had very serious droughts. And I remember that before, we used to talk about, remember the drought of 2010, how we had no rainfall in 2010. Well, now it's the drought of 2022, the drought of 2023, the drought of 2024. This is not something that's happening every 10 years or every 15 years. It is something that is happening almost every year. And even when you do not get a hurricane, you still get flooding, you still get heavy rainfall, and that can cause serious problems. Those of you who live in the north of the island can remember the flooding we had in November 2 years ago, came out of the blue. We remember the Christmas Eve trough. That was when, I think 2015, caused serious flooding. So flooding and heavy rainfall can cause serious damage to infrastructure and can contaminate water sources. As I said, our oceans are getting warmer, and that is having an impact on marine life. But the other scary thing that is happening is our oceans are getting more acidic. And that's because our oceans are being forced to absorb more carbon dioxide. Because remember, we're putting more and more carbon dioxide out into the atmosphere. And very often people tell you, well, what absorbs carbon dioxide? Trees and forests. That's true. Trees and forests absorb carbon dioxide because we all heard of photosynthesis. They absorb carbon dioxide and they create carbohydrate and oxygen. But the other part of our planet that absorbs carbon dioxide is our oceans. Many people don't know that, but our oceans also absorb carbon dioxide. And the more and more carbon dioxide our oceans absorb is the more acidic the oceans become. Because, and I promise that's the only technical thing I will tell you today, carbon dioxide is CO2. Oceans are made of water, H2O. H2O and CO2 mixes form something called H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. So the oceans get more acidic as they force to absorb more and more carbon dioxide. As the oceans get more acidic and also hotter, coral reefs start dying. Shellfish are not able to form shells anymore because shellfish need a certain acidity, a certain lack of acidity, a certain pH in the ocean for them to be able to form shells easily. And if you have the oceans being too acidic, they can't do it. So those of you, if you like me, I don't eat meat, I only eat fish and seafood, then it means that my food security, my nutritional security is at risk because many of the foods that I would depend on, things like conch, labi, buigo, these things, shrimps, you will not be able to get them because they will not be able to form the hard shells that protect them against predators in the ocean. So that has serious impacts for food security. Latin America and the Caribbean is a biodiversity hotspot. Our region holds half of the world's tropical forests. Half of the tropical forests you'll find in the world are found in Latin America and the Caribbean. Granted, a lot of them are found in Brazil with the Amazon, but you still have Guyana, you still have Belize, that are serious forested countries, and Suriname. 1/3 of the total mammals on our planet are found in Latin America and the Caribbean. Over 1/3 of the reptiles are found in Latin America and the Caribbean. Half of the amphibians on the planet are found in this region, and 2/5 of the birds are found in this region. However, because of climate change and other stresses, we've seen a significant decline, 94% decline in monitored wildlife populations over the 50 years between 1970 and 2020. So our region is the region with the highest rate of biodiversity loss across the world. Globally, the average is 69%. In the Caribbean, it's 25% more at 94%. And that, again, has serious implications for you as a farmer because you are depending on rich biodiversity in your soil, the right combination of earthworms to break down that soil, the right number of butterflies to pollinate and bees to pollinate. If these animals now start becoming extinct because our temperatures are getting hotter, it means pollination of your crops will not take place. And I can guarantee you, you will not go around hand pollinating all your passion fruit and all of your other crops that need to be pollinated by animal pollinators. And your soil structure will not be the same because that soil is now so hot that many of the beneficial organisms in the soil will not be present anymore. So that shows you these pictures just really show you the amount of biodiversity that we will lose with 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and 4 degrees Celsius. So our biodiversity is under threat, and our biodiversity is very important for our economies. Rising temperatures will also spread deadly fungus, experts warn, and that will cause very serious health implications because as it gets hotter, there are diseases that will spread a lot more quickly. The ones we hear about most often are the vector-borne diseases. So things like chikungunya, Zika, malaria, dengue, those are all spread by mosquitoes. As it gets warmer, the conditions become much better for these mosquitoes to breed, particularly if you have stagnant water after flooding, etc. So when we have hotter temperatures, it now makes it much more easily for airborne diseases and vector-borne diseases to spread. But the other thing that extreme weather events do, and again, I saw that when I worked in Dominica, when I lived in Dominica after Hurricane Maria, it causes a significant amount of trauma, anxiety, depression, almost PTSD. You know, the period I lived in Dominica, there were weather systems that were coming through, and people immediately went into a sense of panic because they were just thinking, oh my gosh, not again. We went through this with Tropical Storm Erica in 2015 and Maria in 2017. For us to go through that again and what we went through, people go into a state of panic. Their blood pressure rises. They get anxious. You know, I was interviewing someone as part of the work I was doing in Dominica because I was helping the government set up its climate resilience execution agency and develop its climate national resilience plan. And I had to interview people just to get from them what they felt, what were their experiences with Maria, what are some of the things that we could do better. And there was one lady who started crying to me. You know, she started crying when she started recalling what happened during that night when Maria passed. And that's the kind of PTSD, that's the kind of anxiety that people experience. So climate change has serious impacts on your mental health and your well-being. Imagine you're a farmer and you've had to abandon your crop because, you know, of pest infestation or no water, so you can't do your lettuce and your tomato and your leafy vegetables because there's no water. You may have spent a significant amount of money buying seeds, preparing beds, and putting those seeds in and cultivating, and then find that there's no crop. So you've lost all that money. You don't know how you're going to repay that money. You don't know how you're going to feed your family. That is the kind of stress that climate change brings, and I know that that's a stress that you have to deal with on a regular basis. Increase in respiratory disease. As you have these forest fires, you have these bushfires, it makes it very difficult for people who have asthma, who have COPD, or who have any other respiratory disease for them to function properly because you have there's so much smoke in the atmosphere. There's so many particles in the atmosphere. It makes it very, very difficult. In fact, in 2021, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, 230 medical journals came together and declared the climate crisis as the greatest threat to global public health. So imagine that in the middle of COVID, when we still had not reopened, things were still under lockdown in many places, 230 medical journals came together and said, it's not COVID, it's not the next pandemic. The climate crisis is the greatest threat to global public health. A single weather event can erase years of growth and plunge the country deeper into debt. Because again, one of the things that happens when a hurricane passes is that although aid comes into the country, so you have you have the Red Cross and World Bank and all of them coming in. The responsibility is still the government's to borrow money for it to repair schools, for it to repair roads and bridges and build back. So every time a hurricane passes, the country goes deeper into debt because the government has to borrow more money to recover and repair. And that's one of the things that we don't appreciate. Sometimes we say, oh, these Caribbean countries are carrying a whole set of debt. Yeah, they might be carrying debt because of one or two irresponsible things that were done, but a lot of the debt that they're carrying is because governments have had to be constantly borrowing money to repair bridges, repair roads, to rebuild schools, rebuild hospitals. In fact, the World Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, in a study in 2021, said that climate impacts could cost the Caribbean up to 10% of GDP annually by the end of this century. Now, with the exception of Guyana, there is no Caribbean country that is growing by more than 10% every year. Guyana is the only Caribbean country that is growing by more than 10% every year, and that's because of the oil in Guyana. So imagine that climate change is now costing the region up to 10% of GDP growth every year, when some of our countries are growing by 3%, 3.4%, 1%. It means that there will be no growth, that it will stifle the development of our countries if something is not done about it. And unfortunately, climate-related disasters, they disproportionately impact poorer households. So the poorer you are, the more vulnerable you are, the more climate change impacts you. And they're also more fatal on lower income populations. People who are in the middle to low income brackets are the ones who very often die as a result of climate change. So, that's why, again, I spoke about climate change as being a force multiplier. It increases poverty, it reduces resilience, it makes it very difficult for a country to grow. And unfortunately, women and children are particularly vulnerable because women are the ones who are basically taking care of the household. If there's no water, the women are the ones who have to go get the water. The children are the ones who have to help out. Women and children are the most vulnerable where climate impacts are concerned. And as a female farmer, it's even worse for you because you have two levels of vulnerability. You have the vulnerability at your household level, because you now have to deal with a household that has been impacted, loss of, maybe your roof has gone, you've lost your belongings, there's no water, but you also have to deal with the devastation on your farm. So you have two sets of vulnerabilities to deal with, and that is extremely difficult. So for many Caribbean countries, we are in a continuous cycle of repair and recovery. And it's not just a hurricane, it's flooding, it's drought. So, people might say, okay, a hurricane hasn't hit us for the last how many years, but we had flooding, we had heavy winds, we had drought, and all of these things have an impact and they set us back. So what are the specific impacts on the agriculture sector? Well, I'm sure you could guess some of them because I've gone through them already. This one came out in The Guardian not too long ago, and it said that the climate crisis will cause as much as of a 60% reduction in the land areas that are suitable for banana production by 2080. So that's losing half of the land that we currently use to cultivate bananas and planting. More than half of that land will be unsuitable for production in the next 50 plus years. Stronger hurricanes will cause greater damage to crops and infrastructure. So, we know the banana stems, just how vulnerable they are to heavy winds. But even your tree crops, you have heavy winds, your tree crops can snap. Your greenhouses can be mangled, not just the covering taken off, but your entire infrastructure can be destroyed. You have flooding, and your drip irrigation is damaged. So there are so many different ways that stronger hurricanes cause damage to crops and infrastructure. Reduced rainfall and more frequent droughts will cause crop failure. And I'm sure many of you have experienced during the drought that you've had to abandon some of your vegetables and other crops, but also livestock. If your cows and your sheep and your goats can't get pasture to graze on, then that's a serious problem. If they can't get water, if you have to be fetching water from somewhere to bring for them every single time, it's a strain on you, but it's also a strain on them because I can assure you that they are not getting as much water as they would like because you have to be rationing water. Hotter temperatures will cause heat stress for crops and livestock, but it will also become very uncomfortable and unhealthy for farmers to work outdoors. I'm sure you're already experiencing that. It is very unhealthy for you to work outdoors. I do a little bit of backyard gardening, of kitchen gardening, and I can't spend too much time outdoors. If I spend an hour in my kitchen garden, I want to run back inside because that heat is just killing, and I do it very early in the morning or late in the evening. There's no way I'm out there 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But you don't have a choice. You're not like me. I'm doing this as a hobby. This is your life. This is your livelihood. And for you to be out there in those temperatures, it is very unhealthy. So you have to make sure you're completely hydrated and that you could shade yourself whenever possible. Changing environmental conditions will affect pests and diseases. So as temperatures increase, the metabolic rates of insects also increase. So they eat more to survive. The hotter it is, the more they eat, and the more also the faster that they multiply, and that will cause a problem for you. So you have increased incidence of plant and animal pests and diseases, and there have been a lot of studies that have shown that as the temperatures get warmer, then the impact of those pests and diseases. And also what happens is that many of these pests and diseases start migrating. So pests and diseases that you will not find in the Caribbean or you'll not find in other areas are now migrating to those areas because it is warmer, the conditions are more favorable, and also it's easier for them to migrate because we're moving produce, we're moving people. So people are moving every day. People are going from one country to another. You don't know what you're carrying, what insect you're carrying on your shoe, or what you've inadvertently packed in something that you bring across with you. And that is all it takes for these pests and diseases for them to reach another country and then start multiplying. Climate change is also impacting ecosystems, and I said that already, causing loss of biodiversity, and so that's affecting things like your pollinators, but also natural pest control, because very many times you have like the ladybird beetle that is a natural pest control. It feeds on things like the mealybug. If you now have something that impacts the ladybird beetle, and that beetle cannot thrive the way it would, then whatever it was feeding on will now start to cause a problem. So not just pollinators, but also natural pest control systems. Sea level rise will negatively affect soil fertility. As that sea is rising, then it's not just what you're seeing above the surface, but it's what you're not seeing below the surface, because it's not just the top, the sea is not just rising on top, it's rising right through. So your soils are becoming saltier, they're becoming more saline, particularly those people who farm near the coast. So you will find that maybe if you do some soil testing, your soils have become more saline as a result of sea level rise. But the other thing that sea level rise does is that it now starts impacting groundwater. So in countries like St. Kitts and Nevis, Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, where they have wells and they depend on groundwater, subsurface water for their drinking water, a lot of that water is now becoming saline, is becoming brackish, and is not fit for drinking anymore because salt water is gradually getting into it, and that is a serious problem. Climate change will increase the risks that are associated with farming and make it more difficult for small-scale farmers to access financing and other resources. Because as difficult and as risky as farming is right now, can you imagine constantly having to be dealing with hurricanes and flooding and everything? It's already tough. It's already difficult for you to get money, for you to get a loan from a bank, for you to do any type of farming. Can you imagine if now the bank, the loans officer is telling you, well, I can't really lend you money because the last 3 crops you've had, they've all failed because of floods or hurricanes or heavy winds. So it's going to make it very difficult for small-scale farmers to access financing and other resources. And as I said, the big ones, greater water insecurity, greater food insecurity. So what can be done? Well, that's not what I was asked to talk to you about today. I was asked to tell you about the impacts of climate change on agriculture on Thursday. Stay tuned. When you come back, we will then look at how we can adapt. What are some of the things that we can do to cause ourselves to be more resilient and cause ourselves to be able to weather that storm, so to speak, and lessen our vulnerability and increase our resilience. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you I need to get this pull off. Thank you very much. Merci. Gracias. Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher, for a very well-detailed presentation on the impact of climate change in agriculture. It helps us to be more aware and the challenges that we face, including the strategies required Your expertise and perspective was greatly appreciated, and I'm confident your message will continue to inspire the meaningful action moving towards. Because I've realized these days it was definitely hot and we have to take more water intake than usual. So thank you so much for that session. Somebody had a question in the chat. Wendy, can we say that the Sahara dust issue is also part of climate change impacting us?
To some extent, yes, because as conditions get drier, then clearly you would get the conditions in the Sahara. Drought conditions will also increase the amount of dust that's coming out of the Sahara. So most definitely, Sahara dust is a kind of indirect consequence of climate change, because as you move towards desertification, or deserts become even drier, and deserts can become drier, then you do have more Sahara dust that will be produced. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? If you do have a question, you can raise your hand. If not, you can place it in the chat. Also, there was a poll that was sent out. It'd be grateful if you could just fill out the review form, please. There was a question, Doc, that's come from Eugene. What's causing the heat in the North Pole?
That's a very good question. I can't tell you I shouldn't say I can't tell you that I know for sure. What we found is that in the North Pole, the heat it's getting warmer 3 times the global average, and in the South Pole, twice the global average. So what you find is a kind of feedback mechanism. The white ice, the snow reflects the heat. So you know that if you're wearing a white shirt and you're outside, you're a little bit cooler than if you're wearing a black shirt like I'm wearing today. So what happens is that as that ice starts to melt, then the black permafrost starts getting exposed. So you don't have that white covering anymore. You have soil, you have permafrost, and that now absorbs the heat. So that dark under surface beneath the snow is actually absorbing heat, and it's causing now that heat to multiply. So the more ice that melts is the more ice that will melt, because you have a kind of what we call a feedback mechanism. And you're going from white to darker to black, and that now causes the warming to intensify, but even more so the impact of the warming to be more significant.
Thank you so much. And next question is, since temperatures are rising, this means we are currently in the danger zone?
Correct. Yep, we are. And it's one of the things we said, that although we said 1.5 to stay alive, and we argued for 1.5 in the Paris Agreement, but we always said 1.5 is not a safe limit. Once we went past 1 degree Celsius, there was no safety anymore. It was that, okay, 1.5 is the absolute limit, that anything above that, then we start seeing some really serious impacts. But we've seen hurricanes. When Hurricane Maria hit Dominica in 2015 and Irma hit the BVI in 2017, we were not at 1.5 yet. We were somewhere around maybe 1.1, and we're already seeing those impacts. When we had the drought, we had a very serious drought in St. Lucia in 2010. We were nowhere near 1.5, but climate change was already impacting us. So the deeper you get, the further you get into 1.5, 1.6, 2 degrees Celsius, then the greater that danger zone is. So yes, we are going deeper and deeper into that danger zone. And what is even more worrying is if we're not able to go back. So it's like you're going into an oven, right? But you're not that far into it that you can't turn back and go out. But the further and further in you go, then the more difficult it is for you to come back out, because you've just gone so far in. And I think that's probably the simplest analogy that I can give you about where we find ourselves right now.
Next question is, what do you think is our biggest risk as temperatures are rising?
I think that in the Caribbean, one of the biggest impacts that we have to worry about is water availability. Because the water cycle has become so variable now. You can't predict. There used to be a certain level of predictability with water. You would know when it would rain. You'd know, yeah, okay, we might have a drought this year, but you know how long it would last. Climate change, the projections we're seeing is that there can be as much as, I think they said, 15 to 20% reduction in the amount of rainfall that we will get, particularly in the Southern Caribbean, as a result of climate change. So can you imagine? It's already so difficult now, particularly during our dry period, January to May, which is usually our dry period. Think about that getting worse. So I would say that is one. Water availability for me is a big issue. Just the heat. I think we're underestimating just how devastating this heat is, and people are not hydrating sufficiently. And you don't hydrate sufficiently, heat stroke, your kidneys now start being impacted because your kidneys are working under stress. So I think the heat and water stress. Hurricanes are always a problem. And as I said, it only takes one hurricane, just one hurricane to go for an island. And the thing that, again, many of the developed countries don't understand is when Katrina went through New Orleans, Louisiana, the only part of the United States that was affected was New Orleans. Life was normal in the rest of the United States. When Sandy went through the eastern seaboard of the US and caused damage in New York, yes, things were bad in New York, but the rest of the US, things went normal, and they could help New York. They could send relief in. When a hurricane goes across a Caribbean island, that entire island is devastated. That entire island stops functioning. Nothing is working. Not even government is working because government offices have been blown away. Some of the ministers don't even know if they have a home. There's no water. There's no electricity. People's lives, lives have been lost. Cattle, livestock have been lost. Bridges have been washed away. All of these things, and to now start recovering, even to get relief in, your airports are closed because your airports are so badly damaged. Your ports might be damaged, so it's only small boats that can come across. So they don't understand just how devastating one hurricane is, because they figure, okay, there's an impact in my country, the rest of the. And the other thing too with hurricanes is that sometimes they don't just hit one island, they hit multiple islands. So, it's not just St. Lucia, it might also be Dominica, it might also be Antigua, that in passing through the Caribbean, a hurricane might hit multiple islands, so making it even more difficult for something like CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, for it to deploy resources, because it has to deploy resources to more than one island. So I think that is what, those are some of the things that people who don't live in the Caribbean, who don't live in those small states, do not understand.
All right, thank you so much. What would be done to the countries that are in denial?
That's a good question. Some of the countries that are in denial will feel the impacts of climate change, and they're already feeling the impacts of climate change. Look at the United States, for example. The US is not as a whole in denial, but the administration is in denial. So the current administration in the US believes that climate change is a hoax. There's no such thing as climate change. But they're already feeling the impacts of climate change. They're already seeing the droughts. They're already seeing the flooding, and they will continue to feel it. So the countries that are in denial will, whether you're in denial or not, doesn't mean that it won't happen. And these impacts are already happening to them. But the other thing that I think will happen, those countries that are in denial and are causing the problem, we now have a tool to be able to deal with that. Because prior to this year, it was what we were dealing with was the Paris Agreement, which was a gentleman and a gentlewoman's agreement. We all signed on to it, but we all agreed that we do these things, but they were voluntary contributions. They were things that we were not compelled by law to do, not under the Paris Agreement. However, there were two legal decisions recently. A decision by the Inter-American Court on Human Rights that came as a result of a challenge, I think, that was placed by Chile and Colombia. And most recently, the International Court of Justice, which is the biggest court in the world that deals with disputes between countries. So anything that's not criminal and involves a dispute between countries is dealt with by the International Court of Justice. And a couple of years ago, a group of students in Vanuatu, a Pacific island, decided that they wanted to test whether countries had a legal responsibility to do the things that they committed to doing in the Paris Agreement. So they posed the question to the UN, to the United Nations, about what are the responsibilities and obligations of countries that have committed to doing certain things in the Paris Agreement where climate change is concerned and have not done it. So what recourse do the countries that are being impacted, what recourse do they have, and what are the obligations of these countries? That started off with Vanuatu. It then spread to another 131 countries. So I think by the time it got to the UN, 132 countries had joined Vanuatu to pose that question to the UN. The UN General Assembly decided that it would elevate that question to the International Court of Justice. And the International Court of Justice issued a ruling in July of this year, just a couple of months ago, that said that countries have an absolute obligation to take action to prevent climate change. They have an obligation to do everything within their power to reduce the harm, not just within their boundaries, but if you're doing something that is impacting, so let's say something is happening and something is being done in the US and it is having transboundary effects outside of the US, in the Pacific or in the Caribbean, the US is responsible and is liable and can be asked to pay compensation to these countries. So it was really a landmark advisory opinion. So it gives us now a legal basis for us to now start mounting legal challenges and now start suing some of those countries and some of the companies. And the other thing the ruling said is that countries are responsible for what happens within their jurisdiction. So you can't say, okay, I'm Russia or I'm Japan, and say, well, it's not me, it's a company that is operating in my country and I have no control over it. It's a private company. No. The ruling said that you have that responsibility. That responsibility is not the responsibility of, you have a responsibility to make sure that the companies that are operating within your borders do what they have to do to reduce the harm by climate change. So what will happen is that we now have a legal precedent. We now have legal documents that will allow us, particularly civil society, because you see, governments don't always like suing other governments, because you might find that a government might figure, boy, yeah, they're doing that to harm me, but I have good relations with them. They're giving me aid. They're one of the big, whenever we have a problem, or look, I just got a big development package from them, then I might not want to sue them because it's kind of looking in bad faith. You know, they tell you, don't buy the hand that feeds you. Well, that's governments. But civil society, there's nothing stopping civil society from doing it. So there's nothing stopping, just like those 8 students in Vanuatu decided that they would test this, and it went all the way up to the International Court of Justice. There's nothing stopping a group of farmers in St. Lucia saying, look, what you're doing is destroying my livelihood. It is now impossible for me to be a vegetable farmer anymore, or a livestock farmer, or a banana farmer, or whatever. And I can attribute that to the climate change and the impacts on our environment that have come from these emissions that are coming from Russia and the European Union and from the US and from Canada. So you have to do something about it. So I'm going to take you to court. So there's nothing stopping civil society from now taking companies and governments to court. And the equivalent is what happened in the US over 3 decades ago, when the tobacco industry was denying that cigarette smoking was dangerous and caused cancer. They said that, hey, it's your choice. If you decide you want to smoke cigarettes, you cannot come to me and tell me that I caused cancer. You caused the cancer. You're the one who smoked, and who knows what else you did. But the court ruled and said, no. You are responsible. The tobacco industry is responsible. The science shows very clearly that cigarette smoking is dangerous. It causes cancer. So you have to take steps. You have to start putting warning labels on your cigarettes. You have to stop advertising to children, and you have to start doing a whole bunch of things. But the other thing you have to do is you have to pay compensation to all of these people who've had cancers, be it throat cancer or lung cancer or others, from using your product. And when these tobacco companies had to go into their pockets, dig deep into their pockets and start settling these multi-million-dollar lawsuits, that's when they change. And I believe the same thing will happen with the fossil fuel sector. It is only when we cause the big oil companies and some of the countries to now start paying for the harm, the damage that they've caused, that we will see a change. the negotiations are very important, and it's important to get everybody around the table. But at the end of the day, people only start acting when their pockets start feeling. And I think that's what those advisory opinions have done.
Thank you so much. Next question, would crops be harder to grow based on the global warming?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some crops that will be harder to grow. Some crops have a nice sweet spot of temperatures within which they operate. But it's not just the heat. Remember, it's also the water availability. So there are two things that come with with global warming. It's the heat that makes it very difficult for some of your crops will not be as productive. So your yield will be significantly decreased because it's just the conditions for those crops to produce flowers and set fruit will be the more challenging the hotter it gets, and of course the less rainfall that's available. So yes, some crops will be more difficult to grow with hotter temperatures, particularly some of your leafy vegetables that depend a lot on water. You have to be constantly watering. You have plants that are wilting because it's so hot and they're not getting the water. So yes, absolutely. Some plants, some crops will be more difficult to grow. And I think that's why we have to have research by our university, the University of the West Indies, the School of Agriculture, and also CARDI, the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, to now start looking at varieties that are more heat resistant and are more drought tolerant. So maybe some of the varieties that we're growing now, we may have to shift to varieties that can tolerate heat a lot better and can tolerate drought conditions a lot better than some of those that we're growing right now. So it's not that all is lost, but we probably will have to make a change, and hopefully those varieties will yield just as well as the varieties that we're growing, but also that the product is as marketable as, so you've not moved to another variety, let's say of cucumber, that is more drought tolerant and more heat resistant, but the cucumber is a smaller cucumber, or it's a cucumber that's weirdly shaped and people don't want it, or your tomato is smaller and nobody wants to buy that tomato. So, it's all these things that we have to look at.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. How do farmers adapt to shifting rain patterns that may be possibly affecting their crops?
So remember that my last slide was stay tuned. So stay tuned. I'll deal with that on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. What can I do personally to fix this problem?
You can't. There's nothing you can do to fix the problem. There are things that you can do to make yourself more resilient. So if water availability is going to be a problem, then you need to start storing water. So you need to store as much water as you can. And I know Helen's Daughters had a program a couple of years ago or last year, I can't remember when, where it distributed water storage tanks to farmers. I think that was such an excellent initiative. And I remember telling Keithlin that was great. You have to start storing water because you'll find that the water that you need, you will probably not be able to get it during the dry season. So water storage is one. Maybe shifting to, because a lot of our agriculture is rain fed and you depend on the rainfall for your plants to get irrigated, start looking at things like drip irrigation that are a lot more water efficient and will allow you to be able to distribute water to your plants when they need it in the quantities that they need. And hopefully drip irrigation that is gravity fed, because if we're talking about drip irrigation now, that has to depend on a pump, then I've now increased your operating costs because running a pump is electricity. So there are all these trade-offs. So certainly water, doing things like mulching and covers so that you reduce on the amount of evaporation from your soil so that you could keep that water when you water. Because if you water at 11 o'clock in the morning, or even at 9 o'clock in the morning, these days it's so hot that even 9 o'clock in the morning is too late. You water at 9 o'clock in the morning, the sun is already blazing. That water does not even get to your roots because that water is evaporated so quickly. So you want to make sure that you mulch, that you have a covering around the plant, around the root base, so that that water stays in and you prevent that intense sun from hitting it. So there are things that you can do to individually. You try to retain as much moisture as possible. So you put organic matter into your soil. But again, I'm going into things that I will discuss on Thursday. So yes, so there are things that you can do, but individually you can't stop it. Climate change, the greenhouse gases that we're talking about, let's assume St. Lucia were to move tomorrow from using diesel. So Lucelec uses diesel for it to generate electricity. It imports diesel, it brings diesel in, and it uses that diesel to power its generators at cul-de-sac to generate electricity so that all of us have electricity in our homes, in our offices, etc. If tomorrow, by some stroke of good fortune, we were to eliminate the use of diesel completely, so Lucelec were to move to 100% renewable, so all of its electricity would be generated from wind, from solar, and let's assume we can get geothermal going. So from these three things, we shifted our cars, we stopped using gasoline and diesel in our cars, and they were completely electric vehicles that were being plugged in to a grid that was powered by solar or by some other renewable form. So we were not burning fossil fuels at all. St. Lucia's contribution to the total amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted in our atmosphere is 0.008%. So that is the equivalent of putting a bucket of water into going to Sandy Beach or going to Pigeon Island and dropping a bucket of water into that and waiting to see if the sea level will rise. It will not. If St. Lucia were to stop all of its production of emissions from greenhouse gases, we would stop 0.008%. Even the entire Caribbean as a whole generates less than 0.2%, less than 1/5 of 1%. So if we stop, it does not make a difference. We have to get the big emitters, China, India, Russia, United States, European Union, the UK, Japan. Those are the countries we have to get to start making a change so that they use less fossil fuel. So that's why we have to lobby. We have to use whatever is within our power. Speak to our governments and tell our governments, we need you to do more. We need you to put more pressure on these countries. Every time you speak to them, impress upon them the importance for them to stop using fossil fuels and start using renewable energy, because it is impacting us. It is impacting me directly as a farmer. So, and if this continues, it means that my daughter, my granddaughter, my great-grandson will not be able to function as a farmer because conditions will be so unfavorable for them to farm. So those are some of the things that you can do.
Thank you so much. And the next question is, because of the greenhouse gases mainly generated from the big countries, how can our small country lobby for financial aid for those large countries who are very responsible for most of the greenhouse effects?
And we're already doing that. So we are lobbying. There's some instruments, some financial instruments that were set up specifically to provide support to developing countries like ours. So you have the Green Climate Fund, you have the Adaptation Fund, you have the Global Environment Facility, and recently you have the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. So all of these funds are contributed to by the developed countries. That's how they're supposed to be capitalized. So the developed countries, the US, well, not the US anymore because Trump has pulled out of all of these things. So Trump is not putting any money anymore, but European Union, Japan, and all of those other countries, Canada, they are continuing to put money, New Zealand, Australia, into the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund. There are two problems. The first problem is that for you to be able to access the funds, you have to show that the problem you're trying to solve is a problem that was caused by climate change. So you must have data that will show that you are addressing a problem that is caused by climate change and not a normal developmental problem. So you cannot go to them and say, okay, we want to put a dam in the Trumasi River. So just like we have the John Compton Dam that serves the north of the island, we need to put a dam on the Trumasi River so that we will now be able to supply the southern belt from Micoud all the way around to, let's say, Labrie with water from that reservoir. Because that's a climate change problem. We have less water now, so we need to be able to provide water to these people. What the Green Climate Fund or the Adaptation Fund will ask you is, how do you know that the problem you want to address, that water problem, is caused by climate change? Do you have data showing that there has been less rainfall in that area over the last 20 years and that the amount of rainfall has been steadily going down? Do you have data that shows that the stream flows in the Trumasi River are not what they used to be before, so that the amount of water that is flowing in the Trumase River now compared to, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago is different. You can't tell them that, boy, you know, my father said that when he was a little boy, he used to be able to go and dive in that water, in that river before, and you can't dive in it anymore. So we know that climate change. No, they don't want to hear that. They want to see hard data that has been that is used to prove that that is a problem. Secondly, the project proposal, you can't just put a 2-page project proposal together. It has to be a significant project proposal that shows every element of what you're trying to do. And so it's a difficult undertaking to develop a project proposal to submit to any one of these funds. Normally takes anywhere between 3 and 5 years, 3 to 4 years. By the time you finish a project proposal, the problem you're trying to deal with has worsened in magnitude. The other thing, and for me, that's the disappointing thing in all of this, is that the money that they're making available is nowhere near the amount of money that we need. So the Green Climate Fund, for example, in 2015, a decision was made that, no, 2008, was it 2008? A decision was made, at the 2009 at the COP in Copenhagen. I think it was COP 15. A decision was made that every year from 2020, the international community would mobilize $100 billion every year and make that money available to small island developing states, developing countries, least developed countries, so that they have money to deal with the impacts of climate change. We in 2025, at no point from 2020 have we come anywhere near to seeing that $100 billion every year that was pledged in 2009 and that they said would be available from 2020. It's the first problem. The second problem is that $100 billion is not adequate. It's not sufficient because the studies that have been done by groups like the United Nations Environment Programme and others have shown that the amount of money that developing countries need every year to adapt to the impacts of climate change is somewhere around $350 to $500 billion every year, right? So they promise us $100 billion a year. Even if they were to give us $100 billion a year, that would not be enough because what we need is closer to $500 billion a year. And that's just adaptation. That's not dealing with loss and damage. And that's something I didn't speak about in my presentation. But loss and damage deals with the impacts of climate change to which you cannot adapt. So there's certain things you cannot adapt to. You cannot adapt to a hurricane that passes through your country and completely destroys it. You can't adapt to that. There's no way you can say, okay, I've adapted to it and I've made myself resilient. You can't be resilient to a Category 5 plus hurricane. You cannot adapt to rising sea levels that have caused you to lose significant portions of your coastline. So if you look at what is happening, particularly in the south, on the southwest coast of our island, like Labrie and Vieux Fort, and the amount of sea level rise and what we're seeing happening to the beaches in those areas. Granted, some of it was illegal sand mining, but a lot of it is due to sea level rise. You can't adapt to that. You can't adapt to your oceans becoming more acidic because they're being forced to absorb more carbon dioxide, and you now have less shellfish, or the oceans are so warm that the kingfish and the dolphin that the fishermen used to be able to get, they're not getting them anymore because the oceans are so warm that these fish are migrating somewhere else. These things you cannot adapt to. So that's where we speak about loss and damage. That's the things that are irreversible that you cannot adapt to. And there's a separate pool of money that has to be made available to that. Now, last year, the international community operationalize something which is called the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. So that's money that they would make available. And loss and damage is something that small island developing states have championed for the longest while. It was one of the things when I was a minister, it was one of my things I negotiated most strongly for loss and damage, and to get the international community to recognize that loss and damage was real and that loss and damage was something that they had to deal with. They didn't like it because they thought that in talking about loss and damage, the next thing for us would be talking about liability and compensation and them having to pay us. So they never like the loss and damage argument. Well, loss and damage is here. It's in the agreement. So there's a fund now. The fund has pledges of $750 million in it. Well, it has pledges of $750 million. It only has $250 million worth of money in there. That's the money that they've deposited in there. Do you know how much money the scientific community has determined will be required every year by developing countries to respond to loss and damage? $400 billion. But we have a fund that has $250 million. That is nothing. That will not allow, you see what happened to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Grenada, or what happened to Dominica with Hurricane Maria. That $250 million wouldn't have been a drop in the bucket for the Prime Minister of Dominica to deal with the devastation that his country went through. Remember I said it was 226% of Dominica's GDP? That's a lot more than $250 million. But you know what is the quevche in all of that? What is really difficult and heartbreaking in all of that is that the fossil fuel industry continues to subsidize fossil fuels, the same fossil fuels, the same oil and gas that they've said they will phase out by the middle of the century and start using renewables. They are subsidizing it. And these figures are IMF figures. They're not my figures. They're not Oxfam or Greenpeace figures. They are IMF figures. Every minute, the fossil fuel industry is being subsidized to the amount of $13 million every minute. Those are the subsidies that are being put in the fossil fuel industry to make it competitive and to make it viable. Last year, I think they valued the total subsidies in the fossil fuel sector to be $7 trillion US dollars. Yet they're struggling to give us a little $100 billion every year for the damage that they're causing. And then to make matters worse, what they're saying to us is that some of the money that we're giving to you is private funds. So it's not a grant from a government to a government. It's private funds. You have to borrow that money from us. So you know what that is like? That's like me coming with a baseball bat or a bat or 2x4 and breaking both of your legs. And then telling you that the surgery that you will need to reset your bones, the cast that you will need to keep your legs immobilized while the bones heal, and the crutches that you will need for you to walk around in when you have that cast in, and the healthcare that you will need, you have to borrow that money from me to pay for it. That is what they're doing. So they're basically saying to us that, okay, the money you need for adaptation and to respond to climate change, we can make it available to you, but we will make it available to you at market rates, so you have to borrow and you have to repay us, and you have to repay us with interest. That does not make sense. And we've been resisting and saying that you cannot ask us to borrow money from you to solve or to address a problem that you cause. That is not justice. That is not right. And that has been one of the arguments, one of the debates, and one of the fights that we've had for the last 10 years, 15 years in this area.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what challenges are the Caribbean islands facing in making a move towards adapting clean energy sources such as wind and solar?
Great question. The first challenge is finance, because it's expensive to put in renewable energy, to put in a wind farm, to put in a utility scale solar farm, such as what Lucelec has in Latuni and Viewfort right now. It costs a lot of money. And many of the governments and even the utility companies don't have that fiscal space to allow them to do that. Then it's also a matter of attracting investment. So you could attract foreign investment to do it, foreign direct investment to do it. But in many of our countries, we have electricity supply acts. We have legislation that is very unfriendly to external investors. The way these electricity supply acts were set up in all of the countries, let's take St. Lucia, for example. In 1965, the Electricity Supply Act was passed in Parliament. And that Electricity Supply Act gave Lucelec an 80-year monopoly for the generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity. Now, it was important at that time because the government needed to give the investors the space and the confidence that they could come in and invest in St. Lucia, putting in the energy infrastructure to generate electricity and to reach every nook and cranny. Granted, some parts of the country will reach later than others, but to make sure that every part of the island had electricity, that you had street lights, that people at their homes, they were no longer using candlelight and kerosene lamps for them to read, that you put electricity. So the only way that could work for a country of our size was to say to the investor that we will give you a monopoly so nobody will compete with you. But that was an 80-year monopoly. So that monopoly extends to the year 2045. We're in 2025 right now. So it means that Lucid still has another 20 years on that monopoly that it has had in place for 60 years. One of my last acts as a minister in 2016 was to break that monopoly for generation. So we went to Parliament and we broke the monopoly for generation. We said that it is now possible for other people to generate electricity from renewable sources, not from gasoline or diesel, but from renewable sources like wind, like solar, like geothermal. And they do not need Lucilex permission to do that. Prior to that, they would need Lucilex permission. So if Lucilex said, no, I'm not giving it to you, the government could jump high, could jump low. The act said Lucilex had the final say. So we broke that. We said that the government, through something, another thing that well, again, one of the last things that I did as a minister, set up something called the National Utilities Regulatory Commission that regulates the water sector. So it regulates WASCO, and it regulates Lucelec, and all of the people who are involved in either the production of water, in St. Lucia, it's only WASCO, or the production of electricity. It regulates them. So it's now the National Utilities Regulatory Commission that decides what else, who else will come in and generate electricity from renewable sources. So the legislation is there, but the problem is the finance. Problem also is land availability. So to put down a solar farm, you need a lot of land to put down a solar farm. What you can do, and this is something that I've been fighting for, you may have heard me on television speaking about the new electricity bill that is being debated. Senior Minister King put it in Parliament recently and said that because he had spoken to people like me, he decided to not debate it yet because I expressed some concerns over it, because there are things that I felt needed to change and to be improved in that bill, because as far as I'm concerned, it's not fit for purpose. It's supposed to allow people like you and me to be able to put solar panels on our roof and generate our own electricity so that we can reduce the cost of electricity to ourselves. But the bill is not doing that sufficiently. It's doing that to some extent, but it's not doing enough of that. So one way of combating the high cost of getting investors to come in is to allow every solution to put solar panels on their rooftop. And you will find that Barbados, for example, did that. And although Barbados did it in a manner that was not well regulated, and they have a problem now because they have too much solar energy and the grid cannot accommodate it. But if you do it in a planned manner and you use technology, it can now help you to have much more renewable energy and bring the cost of electricity down. So those are some of the things that can be done. But the big issues are cost, and to some extent, like I said, land. If you're doing wind, you need significant amount of land space to put wind farms down. If you're doing geothermal, which we are pursuing, you need to ensure that it's done, one, in a safe way, but also it's done in a place where you could get sufficient steam. The challenge with St. Lucia is that the place where we have all the steam is in the Sulphur Springs, but that's our UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we can't put a geothermal plant there. So we had to look at other areas to put it. And we found, I think Belle Plaine is an area where we found that there's sufficient steam and it's outside of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So I think that's where they're going with setting up the geothermal plant. So there are technical issues, there are legal issues, and there are financial issues.
Thank you so much. Is planting trees a way of combating climate change?
Absolutely. Yeah, because trees and forests they absorb carbon dioxide, right? If you remember your when you went to school, secondary school, photosynthesis, so carbon dioxide is absorbed and the plant converts that into the same carbohydrate that it puts now into the guava and the pod that is growing on your red beans or whatever. That carbohydrate in there has come out of the result of photosynthesis, which is the carbon dioxide that has been absorbed from the atmosphere, sunlight producing energy that now, with internal chemistry of the plant, produces carbohydrate that is formed in the form of either more growing material for the plant, or if it's a plant that is that has a fruit or vegetable, that is what now causes that fruit or that vegetable to grow, and also oxygen is produced as a byproduct. So the more trees you have, the more carbon dioxide you're able to absorb. And remember, I said that problem, one of the major greenhouse gases we have is carbon dioxide. So if you're able to remove more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by more trees, then certainly you will reduce the impact of climate change because you are reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. And conversely, anytime you cut trees, then you increase the impacts of climate change because you're reducing that sink. What we call trees in the ocean sinks for carbon dioxide because they absorb the carbon dioxide. So there's a source, which is the factories that are burning fossil fuels to generate electricity and putting out carbon dioxide. And they're the sinks, which are the ocean, which, as I said, absorb carbon dioxide, and the forests, the trees, the plants that are absorbing carbon dioxide. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Can global warming contribute to the increase of pests and disease? If so, how and what can be done to help mitigate that without using those chemicals that turn around and harm our environment?
Yeah, global warming is actually already contributing to an increase in pests and diseases. Like I said, vector-borne diseases, things like chikungunya, Zika, malaria, dengue, we're seeing an increase in some areas because of temperatures and also water. There's also in some livestock, there's some livestock diseases that we're seeing greater prevalence of in places where the forestry industry is important for logging, for producing lumber, timber. We're seeing there are pests of the trees that are used to produce the lumber, they used to produce the timber that are now increasing as a result. There's a borer, I can't remember the name of the borer, a forest borer, that is expanding both its reach, its geographical reach, and also its reproductive, the number you're seeing because of climate change. But there are other things too. So let's look at malaria, right? You get malaria because the mosquito has this thing growing inside of it called a plasmodium. In the case of malaria, the plasmodium is called the one that most commonly causes malaria is something called Plasmodium falciparum. What we've found, not we, I didn't do the research, but what the scientists have found is that as temperatures get warmer, the amount of time it takes for that bug, that worm, to grow inside the mosquito, that plasmodium to grow inside the mosquito, shortens. So let's say it would normally take 14, let's say 21 days for that thing to go from juvenile to adult in the mosquito, to the point where when the mosquito bites you and it then passes that into your bloodstream, this is now a viable disease that can now give you malaria. That period shortens as the temperatures get warmer. But the other thing that happens with mosquitoes is that the warmer the temperature gets, is the more vigorous mosquito bites. Mosquitoes will bite you. Mosquitoes will bite much more frequently in warmer temperatures than they will in cooler temperatures. And we see it. December, January, February, you don't see that many mosquitoes around because the temperatures are a little too cool for them. Now, as temperatures are getting warmer, one of the things that we may start seeing is mosquitoes year-round in St. Lucia. But at least during the cooler months, December, January, February, you don't see that many mosquitoes. Where you really start seeing mosquitoes is around now, and also because you have much more rainfall, but it's much warmer, and the mosquitoes love warmer climates. That's why you see mosquitoes in the tropics, and you don't see mosquitoes in Canada or in those places where it's colder. So the warmer it gets, the more mosquito, the more active is the mosquito, and also the more aggressive is its biting. So you have a mosquito on steroids because it's hotter and it is biting more frequently and it's much more active. And you have an organism growing inside that mosquito much more quickly that is causing malaria. So you could just think of what the consequences will be. You will get an increase in the spread of malaria because of two things: the plasmodium that's growing more quickly, and the mosquito that is much more active in its lifestyle.
Thank you. How do farmers adapt to shifting rain patterns that may possibly affect their crops?
Thursday.
Okay,
All of
thank you.
the adaptation questions are very, very relevant, but they are what we will deal with in the Thursday session. Thursday session is completely on adaptation and how can we adapt to the impacts of climate change. Particularly, how can farmers and fishers, but mostly farmers, adapt to the impacts of climate change.
Thank you. Does warm weather have anything to do with the amount of earthquake that is happening?
The amount of Earthquakes?
Weathers, if
No,
they have
no.
anything
There
earthquakes.
isn't any correlation that we've seen between the temperature and earthquake activity. Not that we've seen. I won't tell you definitively that there isn't, but there isn't any correlation that we've seen between global warming and earthquakes or global warming and volcanic activity. There is no connection. Actually, quite conversely, anytime a volcano erupts, the temperatures cool down because the ash that the volcano puts out into the atmosphere, that now has a cooling effect on the atmosphere. So if you were to have, heaven forbid that we do, but let's assume you were to have a major volcanic eruption, the ash that remains in the atmosphere actually has a cooling effect on the atmosphere because it's like it's overcast. So you don't get all of that, all of the rays of the sun coming through. But no, we haven't seen any correlation between global earthquakes or global warming and volcanic activity.
Thank you. What impact of the ocean becoming more acidic have on the increase of the Signatera poisoning in fish that affects humans?
The what poisoning?
Signatera.
I don't think there is I have not heard of any impact between ocean acidity and any toxicity. The only toxicity you get is, as I said, the oceans becoming more acidic, so the conditions for shellfish to grow, to form their shells, that those conditions are not as good. So you'll find that as it becomes, in fact, I saw a report recently that said that in the Pacific, the ocean is getting so acidic that some sea crabs are having problems forming their hard shell. And because of that, they're now more vulnerable to predators. And the other thing that acidic oceans will do is that they cause bleaching of corals. So in addition to warm weather causing coral bleaching, acidic oceans also cause coral bleaching. And once your corals start to die, then you disrupt the whole ecosystem and the whole balance, because there are many marine fish that live on the coral reefs, and so that is a problem. But no, I haven't seen any correlation between acidic oceans and poisoning in fish.
Thank you. Do you think that the seasons will reverse this year? For example, during our dry season, it was really wet, and our wet season is dry. What was an impact of climate change? Was that an
Right. So
impact of
Right. So the seasons are not reversing, but what is happening is, as I said, your rainfall is becoming more variable. And so for us, we have two seasons in the Caribbean. We have a dry season and we have a rainy season. Unlike in temperate countries where you have summer, autumn, winter, and spring, here we have two seasons. So our seasons are determined by how much rainfall that we get. So as climate change starts affecting water availability and the whole water cycle, you will find that the seasons are a little bit harder to predict. So you'll find now that mangoes flushing and mangoes bearing fruit more than once a year, because mangoes will bear fruit in response to our water stress. So if the water stress is at a particular time every year, we used to having our mangoes around May, June, July. That's mango season, because that's when the water cycle is conducive for fruiting in mangoes. In fact, all fruiting plants respond more often than not to a stress. So that stress can be cold. So apples, for example, you won't be able to grow apples in St. Lucia because apples need a particular period of what we call in plant physiology vernalization. They need a particular period of cold exposure for them to produce fruits. You will find that some crops respond to differences in daylight. So you will not get sorrel until your days start getting shorter in December, January, February, because the days are shorter there. And sorrel responds to shorter day lengths. And some crops respond to water. They respond to water stress. And as soon as that water stress changes, then you get. So that's why, people will tell you that the season of some of the fruits have changed, but it's really because the water cycle is becoming more variable. And you're getting water at times when you didn't used to get water before, and you're getting dry spells extending into the periods when really you should be having rains. So that is the impact of climate change. The impact of climate change it causes significant variability in water. And because of the variability in our water cycle, that is now having an impact on what we know as our rainy and our dry season. And that in itself is having an impact on our fruits and the fruiting cycles of many of our crops.
Thank you. Did COVID give some relief because most country was practically shut down for a while?
Absolutely. COVID was one of the best things that happened to climate change, because during COVID, the world shut down. So there were no planes flying, there were no factories producing product because people weren't buying, because people were shuttered in, people were sheltering in place. In fact, we had, I think, a 7% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions during COVID. So COVID definitely made a big difference. And that's what is a little concerning for me, because the level of reductions in carbon dioxide emissions we need to see now for the next 10 years to get us to a point where we feel safe about having that we can keep the temperatures to 1.5 is the type of emission cuts, the emission reductions we saw during COVID. And we know what caused those emission reductions during COVID. The world shut down. Nothing was happening. Ships were not on the ocean. And those that were on the ocean were stationary. They were not going anywhere. Planes were not flying. People were indoors. Cars were not on the road. That's what caused a 7% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, the kind of reduction that we would like to see every year to bring down that temperature within safe limits. So that's why I am very, very concerned about our ability, because it's like if there's something that you're doing that's making you ill. But if you stop it now, if you deal with it now, then the chances of you making a full recovery are much greater. But if delaying it, and a year goes by and 2 years go by and you don't do anything about it, by the time you now decide that I'm going to do something about it, what you have to do is too drastic. And the problem may have progressed to the point where you can't bring it back. And that is my fear about what we're seeing with our planet right now. That because when we signed the Paris Agreement in 2015, there were things that we committed to doing, so that by this time, halfway through to the middle of the century, halfway through to 2050, we needed to see ourselves in a place where we could see that temperature curve going down. That temperature curve has continued to go up. The amount of greenhouse gases we're producing has continued to go up, and that is very concerning for me.
Thank you. Do you believe scientists can prevent climate change?
Scientists can't prevent climate change, but scientists can point the way to what we need to do to prevent climate change, which is what they've been doing. The thing about the negotiations and climate change is that it's based completely on science. It's not based on opinion. It's not you and me sitting down and saying, boy, I said really hot these days, and I don't know what's causing that. And maybe if we do something, maybe we might cause more rain, or if we grow some more plants, maybe something might happen. That's not how we work in the climate area. We deal with science. We examine the problem, we see the causes of the problem, and then we look at some of the things that can be done to address the problem. So while scientists cannot stop climate change, nobody can stop climate change individually, but we know what needs to be done to reverse the impacts of climate change. And it's really simple. I mean, it sounds simple. It's difficult for many countries to do, because it means a complete change in the way in which they operate and a change in which their economies operate. But we have to stop using gasoline and diesel to the extent that we're using, and start using renewable sources of energy that do not burn fossil fuels to create carbon dioxide that is causing the greenhouse gas effect. We need to reduce on our consumption of livestock, not stop eating meat. I'm not asking anybody to stop eating, but reduce on your consumption of livestock. So you don't have to eat. And it has been shown that it is healthier for you to eat more plant-based meals. Some people cannot get all of their protein from plant sources. I understand that, but it is healthier for you to eat a meal to have a diet that is more plant-based than animal-based. So reduce on your consumption of livestock, which will allow us to reduce on methane gas production. Reduce on the use of fertilizers and start using more organic fertilizers and not the fertilizers that are putting nitrous oxide back into the atmosphere. So there are things that we can do to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases, and that's what that's the role that scientists play in pointing out the steps that should be taken.
Thank you very much. Next question. What about the impacts of climate change on forestry, food security, and agriculture?
Well, we spoke about some of those on food security, climate change, its impacts on water, climate change, if its impacts the heat stress and everything. So there are serious impacts of climate change on food security. That's what many of the things that the presentation spoke of. On forests, well, good thing about forests is that they are a natural counter to climate change. So the more forest cover that you keep is the more you are able to reduce the impacts of climate change on two levels. One, you are capturing carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere that could cause a problem for you with thickening that greenhouse gas layer. But also you are creating forest cover. You know very well, if you are in an area underneath trees, it's a lot cooler than if you are out in the open. If you're out in the savannah, if you're out in an open field, that open field is a lot hotter than if you're standing on the tamarind tree or some other tree cover. So the more forest you have, is the cooler you can keep your surroundings, and the cooler you can keep your the only problem with having a heavy forest cover, if you're farming, is that you're making it difficult for sunlight to penetrate, which might be a problem for some of your crops. But absolutely, yeah. So climate change has a serious impact on food security and on water security.
Thank you. Next question. What is the difference between climate and weather?
Great question. So weather is what you observe on a day-to-day basis. So the weather today, it was raining, or it was hot, it was dry, it was windy, the barometric pressure was A, the humidity was B, that's weather. Climate is weather observed over an extended period of time, usually a minimum of 30 years. So weather is what you see in front of you. Today, tomorrow, next week, that's the weather. So when you get a weather report, the weather report tells you what conditions you would expect when you step out of your door, when you go onto your farm, when you go into town, that's the weather. Climate change, and that's when we speak about the climate is changing, we're looking at the weather conditions. So rainfall, hurricanes, humidity, temperature over an extended period of 30 years or more.
Thank you. The next person is asking, what is the current prediction of global temperature in 2025? Is that data not available as yet?
Well,
also, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. Also, please, I would like to hear a little bit more of what happened in 2023 with the massive rise in temperature and what caused it.
The massive rise in temperature is because we're emitting more greenhouse gases. There's more and more carbon dioxide. The more greenhouse gases, the more carbon dioxide, the more methane that we put into the atmosphere, the warmer. What you're doing is instead of now sleeping under your sheet, you're now sleeping under 2 sheets or 3 sheets. So now you put a blanket on top of you. That's what's happening. So the more carbon dioxide we put, and it's not just what happened in 2023. If you remember that slide, you'll see that the graph was going in that direction. So every year is getting warmer and warmer and warmer. So 2023 was a build-up on 2022, which was a build-up on 2021, et cetera, et cetera. So 2023 is just a natural progression. 2025 is, I can't tell you what the average temperature is going to be like in 2025, because we have to wait until the end of the year for us to see. It may actually be we may not have broken 2024's temperature this year. It's left to be seen, because 2024, every month, we were setting a new record for that month. I haven't seen that for this year. So we may be we may not break 2024's record, but 2025 is certainly going to be one of the hottest years that we've ever experienced and one of the 10 hottest years that we've experienced. And that's, like I said, because we're continuing to emit greenhouse gases, we continue to produce greenhouse gases. Everybody wants a new iPhone. Everybody wants a new Samsung Galaxy. Everybody wants a new Tesla. Everybody wants a new car every so often. Everybody's going, people are going to the supermarket and buying more food than they need. People are over consuming. People are buying more clothes, and doesn't matter whether you're buying those clothes from who. We have our wardrobes have much more clothes than we need. Every time we do that, we're now causing the production of more product that requires the burning of fossil fuels in a factory. So as the population increases and our need, our appetite, our hunger for products increase, then you will continue to get climate change because you will continue to put, and if these factories are running on gasoline or diesel or burning fossil fuels or natural gas for them to power their machines, for them to power their engines, then climate change will increase, and that's what you're getting.
Thank you. Next question. With the rising sea levels and saline intrusion on farm in coastal areas, how would this be managed?
Well, two ways. One, you retreat inwards with your farm. If you find that your farm is already saline and that the salinity in your soil is at a level that is making it difficult for you to grow. There's some crops that are very sensitive to salinity, and if you find that the salinity in that soil is just not conducive to growing that particular crop, then you have to look for somewhere else to farm, unfortunately. The other thing that governments can do, and some governments have been doing, is putting bricks, putting barriers along in front of the sea barriers so that they can stop that incursion of salt water. That's particularly when you have storms, because when the sea is rising incrementally, anytime there's a hurricane and it causes massive waves to go in, it means that water will get further inland. So what some governments are doing is building seawalls so that seawall will keep the water away. Whether that seawall will be successful in preventing salinization of your soil is another matter, because it may prevent the water from overtopping the wall, but there's nothing to say that there's not still water seeping in at the bottom and getting into your soils. So, but seawalls are the only real barrier to sea level rise, because that way you put a physical barrier. If the sea is rising as a physical event, the only way you could stop it is by having a physical barrier to prevent that sea from rising. Now, if you have a farm, let's say you're farming somewhere on the coast, you cannot go and build a seawall. First of all, that land is not yours. The Queen's Chain is not yours, so you can't go and put a seawall there. But secondly, I don't know that there's any farmer in St. Lucia or in the Caribbean that has the financial resources to go and build a seawall. That's what government has to do. So government has to look at now putting seawalls and putting defenses for sea level rise. But there's only so much you can do. You have to put that seawall high enough that if you have very heavy wave activity, it won't overtop the wall and cause damage behind the wall.
Thank you. Does the less than 1% of the emissions include all cargo and cruise ship boats that we agreed to book to come to St. Lucia?
No, that's just the emissions that we produce on island. So what the emissions that are being produced by aviation and the emissions that are being produced by maritime, that's counted separately. So the aviation industry, aviation sector, which is all the planes flying and everything, that has a contribution to greenhouse gases, and the maritime industry, cargo ships, cruise ships, etc., they also make their own contribution. But that is not factored into a country's emissions, because that cruise ship or that cargo ship calls on different places. It originated in a particular place. So you cannot apportion or say, okay, 10% of when Royal Caribbean comes to St. Lucia, 10% of those emissions are St. Lucia's, another 10% belong to Barbados, where it went to, and maybe 80% belong to Fort Lauderdale, the US, where the ship originated. It doesn't work that way. The maritime sector has its own accounting for emissions. In fact, there are negotiations going on that have been going on this year by the International Maritime Organization, the members of the International Maritime Organization, to see how they can make the maritime sector greener by reducing on the emissions of greenhouse gases. What we can do, and that's something that I've been kind of lobbying governments, not just in St. Lucia, but across the Caribbean to do, is to make our ports green. So to say to the cruise ships that come in, or the big cargo ships, but most definitely the cruise ships, because they because of the high energy used from a cruise ship has so many people on board, rooms are air conditioned, you have all these facilities that they're providing. The average cruise ship, when it is berthed in a port in an island, uses up anywhere between 5 and 8 megawatts of electricity. So St. Lucia's its peak demand for electricity on a daily basis is 60 megawatts. So every day, Lucelec, sometime around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock during the day, there's a peak demand for electricity because it's hot and offices are running ACs, etc., for around 60 megawatts. There's another peak around 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the night when people get home, particularly these days because more and more people are using ACs, but they're turning on their TVs, are doing things around the house, that the peak goes up, but the peak is not as much as it is during the day. So our peak demand for electricity is 60 megawatts. The average cruise ship uses between 5 and 8 megawatts of electricity. So I've been asking governments to do something that is called cold ironing, to invest in something in their ports that will allow for cold ironing. And what that means is that you tell the cruise ships when they're in your port, they have to switch off their engines. Now, their engines are being powered by oil, by heavy fuel oil, by diesel. That's how they're burning. Those are the fossil fuels that they're burning to produce the energy that is powering the boat, that's allowing the boat to go across the ocean. And when the boat is in port, to keep all systems running, keep the kitchen running, keep air conditioning in rooms that people have stayed in their rooms or in the large halls and everything. So if we can get them to switch their engines off and plug into our domestic power supply, there are a few things that we're doing. First of all, particularly if we can get our domestic power supply to be powered by renewable energy. So let's assume that more and more of our energy in St. Lucia is generated by Lucelec and independent power producers from renewables. So geothermal, wind, and solar. And we're using less and less diesel, which is what Lucelec is using right now in its generators to generate electricity. So when a ship comes into port, and there are days when we've had 4 ships at Point Seraphin and Place Carénage. So that's like between 20 and 30 megawatts of electricity. That is the potential that Lucelec has to sell electricity to these operators, to Norwegian, to Royal Caribbean, to Celebrity, to Carnival, and to all these other cruise ships that come there. So Lucelec can be selling electricity to these cruise ships at a higher rate than it's selling it to you and me. So Lucelec can be making money. It's basically exporting energy because these companies are based in the US, in Europe. So they will be paying Lucelec in euros and in US dollars. So that's foreign exchange that's coming in. But also, we are reducing on the amount of pollution from these ships. So when they're in our port, they're not throwing out smoke from their engines because they're using clean energy from our domestic power supply. And the other thing that we're doing is we're reducing on the emissions from the maritime sector, because if every time a ship is in port in St. Lucia, it can save on 5 megawatts of electricity that it's not generating from burning oil in its engines and is now plugging into our supply, then you're making the maritime sector greener. Can you imagine if every island in the Caribbean were to do that? So every port that one of these ships called on in the Caribbean did that, then that's a significant saving. So again, these are some of the things that you can do. And it's a win-win because government wins because you're reducing pollution when the ship is both in Castries or if it's in Soufrière. That near port area is not being polluted by the smoke that the boat is putting out. You are selling electricity to a foreign company and you're getting paid in foreign exchange for it, and you're greening your maritime sector, so the emissions are reducing. So there are things that we can do, and these are not difficult things to do that can help us adapt to the impacts of climate change. But it just takes a little bit of innovation, a little bit of vision, and a little bit of political will and commitment to get it done.
Thank you. The next question is, can green corridors be set up within the city circuits?
Yeah, and we should set up green corridors because Kashmir is becoming a concrete jungle. You know, you have just exposed areas and it is really, really hot in the city. So yes, definitely having green corridors, having spaces where in some countries, trees are being planted on roofs to try to make the buildings cooler, or buildings are being painted in white so that they reflect that heat instead of absorbing it. So there are things that you can do. But green corridors, definitely. We are a tropical island. We are a tropical island renowned for our beauty, for our lush vegetation, and there's no reason for that to be seen everywhere except in the city of Castries. So yeah, in our cities, not just Castries, but in all of our urban areas, we should, as much as possible, develop green corridors.
Thank you. With the expected increase in sea level, can we not consider new methods to desalinate seawater to make water suitable for farming?
Desalination has to be an option because it's not so much because of the increase in sea level, but because of the decrease in water availability. If water is going to be less available because you have so much variability now, then I live in a part of the island where I see water trucks every single day because there are two hotels where I live, and there are water trucks up and down that road in the middle of the rainy season every single day. It's costing these hotels a lot of money for them to be trucking water every single day. There are people in the area where I live who have to be trucking water because they don't get water on a regular basis. Now, the way you solve that, well, there are two ways you solve that. One, Wasco has to sort out this non-revenue water problem because Wasco has a very leaky infrastructure. And anywhere up to half of the water, 50% of the water that Wasco produces, it is losing for something called non-revenue water because there's so many leaks in its system, particularly that raw water line from the John Compton Dam to the Tibbles treatment plant. So much water is being lost there that it's not able to supply as much water as it's producing. So that's one problem. But the other problem is that we also don't have enough storage. And I tell people that you need to store as much water as possible. I have 14,000 gallons of rainwater storage at my home. That's just rainwater. I have tanks that will store 14,000 gallons of rainwater at my home. And I also have another 7,000-gallon tank to store Wasco water. So it is very, very rare that I run short of water at my home because I store enough water to see me through the dry season. People have to start doing that. You can't build a house, you can't put a building up and you don't have enough storage. The water storage has to be the first thing you look at. Unless you're blessed and you live in a part of the country that is never without water. So for those parts of the country that don't have water, we have to look at desalination, particularly for the hotels. I think desalination has to be mandatory for the hotels because the hotels are using up so much water that if we can get the hotels off the municipal water system and using desal, it'll be cheaper for the hotels because desalination is still cheaper. There are two problems with desal, right? First problem with desalination is that it is costly because you have to use a lot of electricity to desalinate. The whole desalination process is very energy intensive. To take that water, pass it through these reverse osmosis filters, and then produce potable water is energy intensive with the pumps and also the chemicals and everything. So that's the first problem. The second problem with desalination is that once you've taken the salt out of the water and you now have water that you're sending to people's homes, what is left is brine. It's very, very salty, and that is now pumped back into the ocean. And yet that can change the whole chemistry of the ocean. So you have to pump that sufficiently far out that it's not going to cause a problem with your the nearshore area, that the nearshore area becomes so saline, so salty, that it's now difficult for fish. It's not even difficult for you to swim in because it's just so salty. It can really contaminate your ocean. So you need to pump it out as far as possible. So that's the problem with desalination. But where you don't have water, hotels can't have guests coming to their hotels and saying to them that we're rationing water. You can only bathe once a day, or when you get out of the ocean, you could only rinse your feet. You can't take a bath. People won't come to your resort. So you must have water. Hotels are big consumers of water, and the way in which hotels can ensure that they have sufficient water for their guests is to desalinate because there is a constant supply of seawater. And you don't need sea level rise to give you a constant supply of seawater. There is a constant supply of seawater. So if you desalinate, and if the hotels are doing desalination that is being run by renewable energy, so the hotels are allowed to put in solar panels on their rooftops. So a lot of the energy consumption, particularly to run their desalination plants, come from renewable energy, and that we put the safeguards in so that brine is pumped as far out into the ocean as possible. Then good. We also have another thing, and that's why we have to use local solutions. We have to be innovative. There's a young man in St. Lucia, a young man from Labrie called Carlos Noel. Carlos did two things. Carlos, he has this company called Invictus. Carlos created this solar power desalinator, but Carlos also patented a way to treat the brine, that salty mixture that is left after we've taken the potable water out. Carlos has found a way to treat that brine so that when it is put back into the ocean, it is not as toxic as it normally would be. What we should do with a Carlos Noel is take Carlos and work with him and see how we can make that product that Carlos has something that every hotel, every business that wants to do desalination, and including Wasco, can use so that they can have desalination that is solar powered and where that brine is treated. And also, every resort in the Caribbean should be using Carlos Noel solution if it works. So, there are homegrown things that we can use. But again, it takes a little bit of creativity, it takes a little bit of vision, it takes a little bit of innovation, but it's possible. Very often we have the solutions within ourselves. We don't have to go overseas and get some foreign consultant to come and tell us what to do. We do it and we pay them a lot of money. But what these consultants come and do is they pick our brains and they produce reports based on what we tell them, and we pay them a whole set of money for a report that we could have written ourselves. So these are some of the things that we have to do.
Thank you so much. And the last question for the night would be, what can we as farmers do to combat the issue of less rainfall or drought?
Thursday, adaptation.
All right, so that will conclude our question and answer segment. So thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher, for your time and your great presentation here this afternoon. And good night to you.
Thank you. See you on Thursday.